Lyanna Stark was never a woman content with the roles that fate dealt her even from the earliest days of her girlhood in Winterfell's echoing halls. She was the lone daughter among the pack of wolves that was House Stark, and while her brothers excelled in swordplay, hawking, and all the arts of warrior nobles, Lyanna found her joy beyond the training yard. She would ride her horse across the frosted fields in the dawn light, silver breath puffing from the beast's nostrils, her laughter a low rumble in her chest, more akin to a storm rolling in from the shivering sea than the gentle giggle expected of a lady. Despite the ladylike lessons her septa attempted to drill into her, there was a spirit in Lyanna that could not be tamed. Rhaegar Stark, her lord father, often found himself torn between exasperation and pride at this unruly daughter. She was a woman of the north through and through, fire in her veins, yet tempered by the cold wisdom of ancient winter. The servants would whisper that she was touched by the old gods, that her wolf's blood ran thick. But no matter their muttering, no matter Ned's gentle admonitions or Brandon's playful teasing, she refused to be anything but herself. Some saw it as a blessing, others a curse. None could have foreseen the fate that would place Lyanna Stark upon the Iron Throne itself. It all began long before the tragedy of the Tower of Joy, before the passions and betrayals that would fracture the realm. The spark was lit at Harrenhal, that ruin of black stone perched on the shores of the God's Eye, where the ghosts of House Hor were said to wail at night. There, in the year of the false spring, a grand tourney was announced. The greatest knights in the 7 kingdoms gathered beneath the scorched towers, lords and ladies from every corner of Westeros drawing together in celebration and pageantry. The realm sang with anticipation of feasts and dancing, justs and melees, an echo of a kinder time. For a brief moment, all seemed bright, as though the snows of winter had melted prematurely and spring had truly arrived. Lyanna had arrived at Harrenhal with her father and brothers. She was not meant to be the center of attention. Women seldom were, unless their beauty was the stuff of legend. But Lyanna had a different sort of beauty. She was a creature of fierceness, her long brown hair unbound and drifting in the wind, her gray eyes alert, restless. She did not need gowns of Myrish lace or jewels to shine. She had a quality that captured hearts and inflamed imaginations, the unwavering defiance in her gaze. People saw it and whispered, some in admiration, others in alarm. She was a Stark, a wolf, and though quiet at times, her presence was not easily forgotten. Yet it was not mere presence that shaped her destiny. It was a single act of compassion, one often overlooked in ballads or overshadowed by grander tales. One dusk, as the fires burned low around the multitude of tourney tents, Lyanna happened upon a group of squires tormenting a local tavern girl. She could not abide such cruelty. The memory of her interference and the quick justice she delivered with her horsewhip would linger in the minds of those young squires, and one man in particular. He was disguised as a mystery knight, but in truth he was Rhaegar Targaryen, crown prince of the 7 kingdoms, who had been wandering among the common folk in search of something he knew not what. Perhaps he sought a fleeting sense of normalcy, or perhaps he heeded the call of prophecy. When Lyanna's eyes met his in that torchlit clearing, there was an unmistakable jolt. Something passed between them, an unnamed understanding. They were both tethered by duty yet longed for freedom, both entangled in webs beyond their control. The crown prince spoke few words, his silver-gold hair tucked beneath a simple hood, but what he said, thanking her, praising her courage, stayed with her. She recognized a softness in him, an almost melancholic nobility, and for a moment her wolf's heart softened in turn. The tourney that followed was legendary. Brandon Stark, destined to be the heir to Winterfell, fought bravely. Ned looked on with quiet pride. Even Robert Baratheon, betrothed to Lyanna by arrangement of families, jousted in full shining armor, lightning bolts of House Baratheon gleaming upon his shield. But the champion of the lists was Rhaegar Targaryen, astride a coal-black destrier, armor chased with rubies that caught the sunlight and dazzled all who beheld him. Each tilt he rode, each lance that shattered against his shield, brought him closer to victory. In the final match, he unhorsed Ser Barristan Selmy, thus winning the champion's crown of blue winter roses. When he rode past the stands, a hush fell over the crowd, for he bypassed his own wife, Elia Martell of Dorne, and extended the crown of roses to Lyanna Stark. Gasps and murmurs spread like wildfire. There, beneath the ruined towers of Harrenhal, he named her the Queen of Love and Beauty, an act that would forever ring in the songs of bards and ignite the tempest that ravaged the 7 kingdoms. Yet in this telling, we must remember that destiny can twist on an unexpected turn, and sometimes the storms it summons can carry us to distant shores. Many speak of how that singular gesture set off a chain of events culminating in rebellion. Others blame the Mad King, Aerys II, or the ambition of Tywin Lannister, or the restlessness that has always thrummed beneath the surface of Westeros. But for Lyanna Stark, that moment when she was crowned Queen of Love and Beauty was when a seed took root, a seed of realization that there existed something more for her than the bleak horizon of a loveless betrothal, more than the narrow, confining corridors of her role as a noble's wife. Unbeknownst to any of them, that seed would grow into the very crown she would one day wear upon the Iron Throne. How did such an unlikely fate befall her? The annals of history often point to the scales tipping when powerful men die suddenly, when lines of succession tangle into knots, and when the hidden strings of the realm's spymasters pull taut. Yet few truly grasp the turning point and act of mercy. Aerys, the Mad King, had grown increasingly paranoid, suspecting rebellion in every corner. He demanded the heads of those he believed conspired against his rule. Among them was Lord Rhaegar Stark, charged with treason for daring to question the abduction rumors of his daughter by Prince Rhaegar. In the canonical tale, both Rhaegar and Brandon died by fire and strangulation at the king's twisted command. But imagine a single alteration, a messenger swift enough to reach King's Landing with news that might soften Aerys' heart or at least redirect his mania. That messenger could have been Maester Waelys, who served at Harrenhal's tourney and suspected a darker game at play. Suppose he reached the king's ear, or the ear of some counselor with the power to stall the king's hand, with the revelation that Rhaegar had not abducted Lyanna at all, that she traveled willingly if at all, or that forces unknown had manipulated the rumor to sow discord. Aerys in his madness might still have ordered Rhaegar's arrest, but the timeline might shift by a day or two, a breath of time in which Rhaegar, a man haunted by prophecy, found the courage to do something unexpected. Perhaps he confronted his father in the Red Keep, brandishing a sword or kneeling to beg for Lyanna's life, vowing that no rebellion was at hand. Perhaps Queen Rhaella, sickly yet resolute, intervened on behalf of her son. However it might have unfolded, in this version Rhaegar Stark was spared a public execution. Brandon might have been spared as well. And so the seeds of war would not bloom so quickly nor so violently. The respite, tenuous and brief though it might have been, was enough for Rhaegar to negotiate. He offered a possibility for binding the North more firmly to the Iron Throne, a possibility that had taken root in his mind ever since he had crowned Lyanna with winter roses. The Crown Prince believed in prophecies about the prince that was promised, a warrior who would save the world from darkness. He believed his children must come from a lineage blended of ice and fire, Targaryen and Stark. And so he proposed something unthinkable, an annulment of his marriage with Elia Martell, or perhaps a royal decree naming Lyanna as his second wife under some ancient Valyrian custom. Stories diverge here, some claiming Elia, already frail, gave her blessings for the sake of the realm. Others say she resisted, but her voice was lost behind the closed doors of the Red Keep. Regardless, Rhaegar found a path that might appease the Mad King, quell Lord Rhaegar's rage, and preserve the peace. Marriage to Lyanna Stark, a northern queen to unite the realms. But in this reimagining, Lyanna hesitated. She sensed the role expected of her was no different than if she had stayed betrothed to Robert Baratheon, a living symbol, a broodmare for royal children. She wanted more than to be an ornament. And so she made a bold demand of Rhaegar. If he meant to bind her to the Targaryen dynasty, she wanted her own throne, literally or metaphorically. She wanted agency, power, respect. She did not wish to be the second wife overshadowed by custom, nor did she wish to be a mere piece in the Targaryen puzzle. She craved the freedom of the North, but if she was to become entangled in the Southron courts, then she would do so on her own terms. Perhaps in any other circumstance, her demands would have been laughed at. Yet Rhaegar was not his father. He was a man consumed by the notion of destiny, by the belief in a prophecy that demanded a fusion of ice and fire. Moreover, the realm was already teetering. Robert Baratheon's pride was wounded by the potential loss of his betrothed, but Lord Stark was not yet in open rebellion. The Tyrells, the Lannisters, and the Martells all watched warily, uncertain of which way the wind might blow. If Rhaegar could bind House Stark to the Targaryens, quell the rumors of abduction, and avert a bloody rebellion, he might yet save the Seven Kingdoms from the chaos that loomed. Thus it was that Rhaegar Targaryen, in a move of desperate ingenuity, pledged that Lyanna Stark would have a crown of her own. As he worked behind the scenes, forging alliances, convincing the Great Council to entertain a radical notion, Lyanna found herself in King's Landing, confronted with the labyrinthine ways of court politics. She was an outsider, a northerner among the perfumed lords and ladies of the capital. Her presence was polarizing. Some whispered that she was Rhaegar's mistress, a usurper of the Dornish princess's rightful place. Others hailed her as the rightful queen of the future, a strong, proud wolf who might bring a welcome wind from the north to blow away the lingering shadows of Aerys' rule. In the Red Keep's Godwood, a pale imitation of the ancient groves of the north, Lyanna knelt by the weirwood tree. She pressed her palm against the carved face in the trunk, seeking guidance from gods she felt had grown distant. The city stank of smoke and sweat, the political tension weighed on her spirit. She still dreamed of open skies and white snows. But she could not turn back. The step forward was a cliff's edge, and there was no longer any path behind her. And so the days wound on, each one bringing fresh intrigues, until finally the Mad King died. The histories here are murky. Some say a fever took him, others claim a subtle poison, a final revenge by an embittered mistress. Maybe the shadows in his mind simply clawed him apart from within. Whatever the case, the effect was the same. The Seven Kingdoms lay on the brink of erupting into war. Rhaegar, untested but determined, was poised to ascend to the throne. Yet within hours, a faction of nobles, alarmed by Rhaegar's rumored marriage to a northern lady, threatened to mount a resistance, claiming that only a son born of Elia Martell should sit upon the Iron Throne. The lords of Dorne were outraged on Elaya's behalf. The Baratheons cried betrayal over Lyanna's broken betrothal. Civil war beckoned as the great houses bristled for conflict. But in a move of cunning or desperation, historians forever debate which Rhaegar crowned Lyanna Stark as queen in her own right. He invoked an archaic clause within the Targaryen laws, a dusty relic from the days of Aegon the Conqueror, who had once planned to distribute rulership of Westeros among his sisters, making them queens of their separate domains. If there can be 3 heads of the dragon, Rhaegar pronounced in the Hall of Nine, why can there not be 2 rulers upon the throne, king and queen, standing as equals? This outraged many. But Lyanna, with a chill running through her veins, realized that the realms might accept her if she proved her strength. If the North recognized her as its queen, if the Crownlands accepted her, if enough lords saw a union of ice and fire as beneficial, then perhaps the realm would remain intact. In one day, she found herself lifted from the uncertain position of a bride-to-be into a seat of unimaginable power. It was like standing in a great wind, unsure whether she would be borne aloft or dashed to pieces upon the rocks below. The official coronation took place before the Iron Throne, a monstrous seat fashioned from the swords of Aegon's conquered enemies. The hall was crowded with courtiers, half of them eager to see her fail. But when she ascended the dais, wearing a silver circlet upon her brow, stark and unadorned, recalling the austere beauty of the North, she felt an odd sense of belonging. She had never wanted to be caged, but if she was to be caged in a castle, let it be the highest of them all, where her howl might echo across the 7 kingdoms. Her father had once warned her of the burdens of power. Now she felt them settle on her shoulders like a cloak of freshly fallen snow. Still, she did not yield beneath that weight. She met the gaze of each lord arrayed in front of her. Tywin Lannister, who frowned behind a mask of cold civility, Mace Tyrell, feigning a smile but glancing at his allies with uncertainty, Oberyn Martell, representing Dorne, his eyes full of smoldering anger on behalf of his sister Elia. Robert Baratheon was not there. He had stormed home to Storm's End in a rage, threatening to call his banners. Only House Stark stood steadfastly behind Lyanna, though even their stance was uneasy. Brandon, proud and headstrong, scowled at the notion of his sister forging alliances with Targaryens. Ned, ever patient, placed his hand lightly on Brandon's arm as if urging calm. Rhaegar Stark, solemn as the crypts beneath Winterfell, felt torn between paternal love and the demands of statecraft. Through the swirl of tension, Rhaegar took his place beside Lyanna, the newly anointed king. The crowd knelt as the High Septon anointed them both. Bells tolled across King's Landing. The castle's ravens took flight. The city watched, enthralled or horrified, by the crowning of a northern queen beside the dragon prince. Somewhere among the masses, a juggler might have dropped his pins in astonishment. Somewhere in the harbor, a crewman might have whispered that winter had come to rule the realm. And so Lyanna Stark became Lyanna Targaryen, first of her name, queen of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men, protector of the realm, alongside her husband Rhaegar, who shared her crown. Their marriage was far from a loving union. There was too much suspicion, too much resentment, and too many unspoken truths. But neither was it an empty sham. They were bound by a common purpose, to keep the realm from splitting apart. For Lyanna, that was reason enough to hold her head high and face the scornful whispers that followed her every step. That is how she began her reign, a lone wolf thrust onto a throne of dragonfire, uncertain of whether she would tame the realm or be devoured by it. Because for all the pageantry of that coronation day, the storms had only just begun. In the early days of her reign, Lyanna discovered that the court was an intricate battlefield. Swords were exchanged for whispered rumors, shields replaced by carefully penned letters sealed with wax and crest. Harsh truths lurked behind every feigned smile. The courtiers tested her, the men who had sneered at her from behind the safety of their silks and fineries, the ladies who whispered that she was a wild creature with no proper breeding. She could see, with each passing day, how they waited for a misstep. She found allies in unexpected places. Varys, the spider, who had long served as master of whisperers under King Ares, approached her quietly. He would appear in the corridors of the Red Keep without warning, like a phantom of swirling robes, and offer counsel. His words dripped with unspoken implications, but Lyanna recognized a certain sincerity beneath his slippery exterior. He whispered of plots forming in the dark, of letters traded across the sea, of mercenaries on the move. In those first weeks, she listened more than she spoke, absorbing every morsel of intelligence. If she was to keep hold of her newly claimed power, she would need all the knowledge she could glean. She also learned from her brother Ned, who had observed how the wheels of power turned in the Vale under Lord Arryn. Though quiet, Ned possessed a keen sense of justice and a knack for patience that Lyanna had often lacked in her younger years. He advised her to move slowly, to be cautious, to know that a single reckless act could topple her from the throne. At times, Lyanna felt frustration bubble inside her. Caution had never been her nature, but caution, she realized, might be her only shield in this dangerous city. Rhaegar was preoccupied with the tenuous alliances holding the realm together. He was not an unkind man, but the burdens on his shoulders weighed heavily. In the eyes of many, he had broken faith with Dorne by setting aside his Dornish wife, even if in name only. Though Elia Martell retained the title of princess and was cared for in the Red Keep, the humiliation she suffered caused ripples of anger across Dorne, and Oberyn Martell promised that the Viper's sting would be felt if Elia was further dishonored. Rhaegar's desire to unite the realm under a prophecy of ice and fire now faced the stark reality of politics. There were rumors that Tywin Lannister was considering a match between Cersei Lannister and Robert Baratheon to keep the Stormlands under control, an ominous sign that the Lannisters might align with the Baratheons if war should break. Lyanna spent her days as queen riding the tension between duty and defiance. She made official appearances, accepting the homage of lords who reluctantly bent the knee. She heard petitions in the throne room, sitting upon the Iron Throne with Rhaegar by her side, or alone on the days he was occupied with other state affairs. She learned to keep her face still as stone when liars and flatterers approached. At night, she would walk the ramparts of the Red Keep, gazing out over the city's flickering lights, remembering the crisp air and boundless skies of the north. Sometimes she would think of Robert Baratheon, recalling how he had once made her laugh with his boisterous jests, how he had bragged about his prowess, how easily she had dismissed him as a mere unstoppable force. Now she understood the power of that force better, and knew he was out there, wounded in pride, feeding on anger, plotting. And so it happened that one day word reached the Red Keep that Robert Baratheon was mustering bannermen at Storm's End. Whispers carried that he was calling Lyanna a false queen and vowing to claim her back by right of betrothal or by conquest. She felt a pang of sorrow. She had never wanted to humiliate him. Their marriage arrangement was forged by their fathers, and perhaps in another life, she might have been happy, running at his side through the fields of the Stormlands. But she had chosen a different path now, one that demanded she put away dreams of youth for the hard steel of sovereignty. Rhaegar summoned her to a private council to discuss the threat. In attendance were the most trusted advisors: Varys, Pycelle, Barristan Selmy, and Ned representing House Stark. As she entered, she sensed the tension radiating from Rhaegar. His violet eyes fixed on her with a troubled expression, as if uncertain how to proceed. "The Stormlords rally to Robert's banner," Rhaegar said quietly. "He has not declared open rebellion, but his letters are provocative. He names us oathbreakers and demands restitution. There is talk of him forging an alliance with the Lannisters." Ned gave a solemn nod, hands folded behind his back. "Robert is proud. He will not take this slight lightly, but do not underestimate him. He is beloved by his men. If he calls for war, the Stormlands will follow." Lyanna clenched her jaw. "He has no claim on me. Our betrothal was never consummated. The alliance was undone by the king's decree, yet he will twist it into some righteous cause. Men will fight for him because they see him as wronged. Varys steepled his fingers, his voice smooth as silk. If war breaks out, the realm will splinter. We cannot afford it. The Lannisters might wait and see which side prevails, selling their swords to the highest bidder at the crucial moment. The Tyrells, ever mindful of their position, might decide to press their advantage. And let us not forget the Tullys, the Arryns, the Greyjoys, who would pick at the spoils. Rhaegar rubbed his forehead. I have written to Robert personally, entreating him to seek negotiation, but he has not replied, and Dorne remains precarious. I must keep Elia and her children safe, or the Martells will bring fire and blood of their own. Lyanna glanced around the table. What if I speak to Robert directly? Perhaps I can persuade him. His anger is with me, not with the realm at large. Ned frowned. Sister, he's gone beyond the point of reason. He feels betrayed not only as a man, but as a warrior. He lost face before the entire realm. He will not simply forgive and forget. She shook her head. But if I do nothing, war seems inevitable. Maybe I can remind him that I never intended to shame him. I've known him since I was a girl. If there's any part of him that still cares for me, he might listen. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of torches along the walls. Rhaegar studied Lyanna, searching her eyes. It could be dangerous, he said softly, if he sees it as an insult, or if his rage consumes him. Let me at least try, she said, for the sake of avoiding bloodshed. Barristan cleared his throat. Your Grace, I will accompany you if you choose to go. I will ensure your safety. Ned immediately stood. I should accompany her as well. Robert was once my friend, but I can see how much he has changed. If we do this, we do it carefully. And so it was decided. A royal envoy would ride from King's Landing to Storm's End under a banner of truce, headed by Lyanna herself, accompanied by Ned, Barristan Selmy, and a retinue of loyal guardsmen. They would attempt to reason with Robert Baratheon before conflict erupted. Rhaegar, burdened by 1,000 duties in the capital, would remain behind to deal with the swirl of tensions among the lords and with the threat of Dorne's displeasure. Lyanna felt a curious mix of trepidation and resolve. She wanted to settle this matter, to speak her truth. Perhaps if Robert heard her, if he saw the sincerity in her eyes, he would lay down his swords. The journey to Storm's End was unnervingly calm. They rode through villages where peasants paused in their daily work to stare. Word had spread that the Wolf Queen traveled south. Some folk bowed awkwardly, unsure of protocol, others simply watched in silence. Lyanna's cloak bore the sigil of House Stark, yet her retinue bore the Targaryen dragon. It was a visual clash that underscored the precarious nature of her rule. Which banner did she truly represent? Wolf or dragon, north or south? She hoped she could serve them both. Storm's End rose on the horizon in all its massive, defiant glory. The fortress was perched on a craggy cliff battered by sea winds that howled off Shipbreaker Bay. The sky was bruised with thick clouds, threatening a downpour. Barristan led their group through the gates under the watchful eyes of Baratheon archers. Ned kept a hand near his sword, though he exuded calm. Lyanna's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her face steady, her chin lifted. She was queen, after all. She would not show fear. They were escorted to the great hall, where a roaring fire in the hearth gave the only warmth amid walls of thick stone. Robert Baratheon stood by the fire, a great bear of a man even at this age, his thick black hair falling to his shoulders, a tempest in his blue eyes. He greeted Ned with a curt nod, then turned to Lyanna. He studied her for a long moment, and she could see the swirl of emotions in his face, hurt, longing, fury. He wore a cloak of black and gold, the crowned stag emblazoned on his doublet, his posture tense as though he might spring into violence at any second. So the wolf girl returns, he said, voice low and rumbling. Come to see the man you threw aside? Or to mock him further? Lyanna felt a stab of guilt. I've come to talk, Robert. This does not need to end in blood. His laughter was harsh. Blood has already been spilled one way or another. You might wear a crown now, but to me you're still that wild northern girl who used to race horses with me in the yard. I thought we'd be wed. I thought. She took a step forward, ignoring the murmur of alarm from her guards. I never meant to hurt you. We were children then, Robert. Our fathers arranged our match. I never asked for it, nor did I protest it at first, but I needed more than what our betrothal offered. He set his jaw, anger flashing in his eyes. And so you ran off with the Targaryen prince? You spat on your vows to me and chose the dragon over the stag. And now you come flaunting a crown that should never have been yours, claiming you'd rule alongside that silver-haired usurper. Ned cleared his throat, stepping between them slightly. Robert, listen. This was not a simple matter. There were politics at work, the king's decree. But Robert shoved Ned's words aside with a snarl. Spare me, Stark. You speak of politics and decrees, but I see betrayal. I see a woman who was to be mine, who now sits on a throne of melted swords with a Targaryen. Lyanna's temper flared. She remembered why she had once been fond of Robert, his fierce loyalty, his humor, but also why she had grown weary of him. I am not a prize to be claimed. Our betrothal never even reached a wedding. I have chosen my path, not to spite you, but because the realm needed it. War would have broken out sooner if not for my compromise. Robert's nostrils flared as he fought to contain his rage. So this is your idea of peace? You and your Targaryen king, the pair of you strangling the realm with your new rules, your new arrangements? The Stormlands will not kneel to that. Barristan Selmy stepped forward, diplomacy in his voice. Lord Baratheon, we wish to avoid hostilities. Her Grace has come here in good faith. There could be a new arrangement beneficial to the Stormlands. Titles, positions on the small council, trade agreements. Robert silenced him with a glare. Don't speak to me of scraps thrown from the Targaryen table. I want no part of it. Then he turned his gaze to Lyanna, eyes flicking from her face to the circlet on her brow. All I want is for you to acknowledge the debt you owe me. You embarrassed me before the realm, and I will not let that stand. Surrender your crown. Yield yourself to me, and I might consider forgiving you. Then we'll deal with your precious Rhaegar. Lyanna's voice came out cold. You know I can't do that. I will not yield what I've fought so hard to keep. If your pride demands war, then you will unleash chaos on the realm. Think of your people, Robert. Think of the small folk who will die if armies march. Is your anger worth their lives? He folded his arms across his chest. And what of my pride, my honor, my heart? Was none of that worth anything to you? You were mine, Lyanna. His words were thick with pent-up pain. I loved you. A hush fell. She felt the weight of those words pressing down on her, the memory of simpler times stirring in her chest. But she squared her shoulders. I was never yours, Robert. Not in the way you believed. Love is not a chain to bind me. I cannot undo the past, but I can shape the future. I beg you to see reason. He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head as though dismissing a dream. You've changed. Or maybe you never were the girl I thought I knew. He looked at Ned. Brother, I have no quarrel with you, but if you stand with her, I won't hesitate to crush anyone who sides with the Targaryens. Ned's voice was even, though sorrow tinged his tone. I stand with my sister. Robert drew a deep breath, as though preparing to declare war right there in the hall. But he forced himself to exhale, and the anger in his eyes turned to a cold determination. Get out. You've come here to parley, and you have my answer. The Stormlands will not bow. If you or your Targaryen king wants my fealty, you'll have to take it by force. So it ended, with storm clouds massing outside the keep and the crash of distant thunder echoing off the cliffs. Lyanna led the envoy out, her heart heavy, her mind churning with the knowledge that war now loomed. She had tried to head it off, but Robert Baratheon's pride was implacable, and the echoes of what might have been reverberated in her chest. They rode away from Storm's End, down winding roads, as rain began to fall. Ahead lay the uncertain path back to King's Landing, where Rhaegar waited, where the uneasy peace balanced on a knife's edge. As the thunder rolled overhead, Lyanna could almost sense the howling winds of fate. She was a queen now, bound to her crown by duty and necessity, but the cost would be measured in blood. Part of her still yearned to race across frosty hills on a winter dawn, free of politics and kings, but there was no turning back. They returned to King's Landing in the midst of a downpour. The city's streets were awash in muddy rivulets, and the common folk scrambled to cover their wares with tarps and rags. The royal party, cloaked and weary, made for the Red Keep without fanfare. Word traveled fast, though, and by the time Lyanna reached the towering gates, she could sense the eyes upon her, courtiers, guards, and attendants awaiting news. Rhaegar met them in a private audience chamber. He wore a worried expression, and his silver hair was damp from the humidity of the storm. Lyanna recounted her encounter with Robert, sparing few details. When she finished, Silence hung in the air like a drawn bowstring. "So it's war," Rhaegar said at last, his tone heavy. "It may be," Lyanna replied. "He won't bend. He resents you. He resents me. He believes we've both wronged him, and he wants vengeance more than negotiation." Rhaegar paced by the fireplace, his brow knotted with concern. "If Robert calls his bannermen, the Stormlands will march. The question is whether the Vale or the Reach will side with him, or whether they'll wait to see if we falter first." He turned to Ned. "Will House Stark stand with the crown, or will your brother Brandon refuse?" Ned raised his gaze, unflinching. "Brandon is proud, but he would not betray Lyanna. As long as my father holds Winterfell, our swords are at her disposal. But the North remembers its grievances with the Targaryen line. We all recall the shadow of the Mad King. My father still bristles at the memory of your father's cruelty. He was nearly executed in that vile trial by combat. The North pledges loyalty, but do not mistake it for warmth. We do this for Lyanna." The honesty in Ned's words pierced the room's tension. Rhaegar nodded. "I understand. We must prove that this reign will not mirror my father's horrors. We must show mercy and wisdom where once there was madness." Lyanna watched Rhaegar's face as he spoke. She could see the weight on him. He looked older than his years, his once bright idealism dimmed by the realities of ruling. Part of her pitied him, yet another part remained cautious. She remembered his talk of prophecy and destiny, how it had led them both down a treacherous path. She was determined to ensure that her own voice would not be lost in the thunder of his beliefs. They called a meeting of the small council at once, summoning Pycelle, Varys, Barristan Selmy, and a handful of other advisors. Oberyn Martell sat in Elaya's stead, arms crossed, gaze flicking to Lyanna with an undercurrent of disdain. She could hardly blame him. His sister's humiliation had left a gaping wound in the Martell pride. Still, he remained, for Dorne was part of the realm, and an alliance, if tenuous, had to be preserved. Talk turned to strategy. The Red Keep's map room became a battlefield of ink and parchment, with each lord and counselor offering perspectives on troop movements, supply lines, and potential alliances. Tywin Lannister's name hung over them all like an ominous specter. If the Lannisters joined Robert, the scales would tip dangerously. If they remained neutral or sided with the crown, the war might be contained. "We need to offer Tywin something compelling," Varys suggested in a soft voice. "Some advantage that ensures his family's prosperity under your joint rule. He is not a man easily swayed by sentiment." Rhaegar tapped his fingers on the table. "He once served his hand to my father, but their falling out was bitter. Yet Tywin is practical. If he sees a chance for glory or a beneficial marriage for one of his children, he may yet throw his lot in with us." Lyanna found herself frowning. Must this always be about marriages and pacts? "I have no intention of discarding our throne simply to wed someone off for political gain." Oberyn snorted. "That's rich, coming from the woman who accepted a crown from the Targaryens. I suppose your talk of independence applies only when it suits you." A flush colored Lyanna's cheeks. She held Oberyn's gaze. "I never asked to be queen, but I am one now, and I will do what I must to keep the realm intact. I also won't apologize for refusing to be bartered like a commodity, not for my own marriage, nor for my family's." Oberyn's dark eyes flashed. "Spare me the northern pride. My sister Elia was bartered, used for breeding, and then set aside. Yet here we are, forced to serve the same throne that tossed her aside." Rhaegar stiffened. "I did not set Elia aside lightly. We remain married under the laws that bind us. Our arrangement was an insult to Dorne," Oberyn cut in coldly. "But let us not tear open old wounds now. War is at our doorstep. If you want Dorne's support, you must guarantee my sister's children stand in the line of succession." Lyanna felt a knot tighten in her chest. She knew the children well enough, a boy and a girl, Rhaenys and Aegon. They were Rhaegar's blood, Targaryens by name. If Oberyn demanded they be recognized ahead of any child Lyanna might bear, that could complicate matters. The talk of succession was like a tangle of briars, someone would always be pricked. She looked at Rhaegar, waiting for him to speak. He chose his words carefully. "Elaya's children are legitimate and they remain heirs to the Iron Throne, second only to me. If I should die, they inherit. Lyanna's potential heirs hold a claim as well, but we can create a structure of joint heritage. The realm has endured complexities before. We will endure them again." Oberyn's lip curled, but he did not press further. The discussion circled back to Tywin Lannister, the gold mines of the Westerlands, and the uncertain posture of House Baratheon. Lyanna listened, her mind spinning with the swirl of alliances and betrayals. In Winterfell, life had been simpler. The snows fell, the dire wolves howled, and loyalty was straightforward. The Starks protected their own. Here, in the south, loyalty was as mutable as the shifting tide. As the council dispersed, Rhaegar touched Lyanna's arm, beckoning her to stay behind. Barristan Selmy lingered discreetly by the doorway, his role as protector never forgotten, though he gave them space to talk. Rhaegar spoke in a low voice. "You did your best with Robert. I'm sorry it came to nothing." She shrugged off the apology. "He's driven by fury. Reason doesn't reach him. I only wonder how many will die because of that fury." Rhaegar nodded grimly. "I know war well enough. The songs speak of glory, but reality is blood and ashes. I wish my father's sins did not haunt us so. Yet here we stand." Lyanna studied him, sensing the sincerity in his tone. "We will face it together," she said, surprising even herself with the conviction in her voice. She had once despised him for snatching her from her betrothal, for crowning her with winter roses that caused an uproar. Yet they now shared a throne and a responsibility that bound them closer than any vow of love could. "We must." In the weeks that followed, ravens flew from King's Landing to every corner of the realm. Some carried pleas for unity, others warnings against treason. Under the blossoming threat of hostilities, a hush fell over the countryside as though all living things held their breath. Lords who had once feigned neutrality now scrambled to choose sides. The Riverlands, ever vulnerable, braced themselves for marauding armies. Tension sizzled in the air like lightning before a storm. Lyanna found herself in a peculiar position. Though she wore a crown and sat on the Iron Throne beside Rhaegar, she felt at times like an outsider in her own court. The ladies-in-waiting were polite but distant. The lords offered courtesy laced with condescension. She was young, a northerner, and most damning, she held power in a system that had never intended for her to rule. Rumors circulated that she was but a puppet, that Rhaegar controlled her every move, or that Varys whispered commands in her ear. Others insisted she was a feral wolf who would bring the harsh discipline of the North upon them all. She had no real friends here, save her family, and even they were scattered. Brandon had remained in the North, overseeing House Stark's readiness for war. Ned remained by her side, a quiet anchor in the sea of intrigue. Sometimes, late at night, Lyanna would stand on a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The sea breeze would caress her cheeks, and she would recall the memory of riding across frosty terrain in the north, chasing the horizon with wind-blown hair. She missed those days, missed the simplicity of living as a young wolf in Winterfell. Yet a part of her burned with a fierce determination. If she were to be queen, she would not be a silent ornament. She would shape the realm's fate, break the chains that had constrained so many women before her. She had no illusions that it would be easy, but neither did she shrink from the challenge. The wolf's blood in her veins demanded she fight. And fight she did, with words and decrees and alliances. Each dawn, she rose to convene with spy masters and generals, signing orders for mustering troops, for sending envoys to treat with uncertain lords, for securing grain supplies in case the roads became unsafe. She studied the ledgers with Pycelle, learning the intricacies of crown finances. She heard the pleas of small folk in the throne room, awarding coin or punishments where needed. Her illusions about royal life shattered, replaced by the unromantic grind of governance. Rhaegar, to his credit, did not diminish her efforts. He treated her as a partner in rulership. When certain lords complained about her direct manner, he gently reminded them that she was their queen. When they objected that a woman knew little of war, Rhaegar asked if they would then also dismiss Queen Visenya, who had once wielded the Valyrian steel blade Dark Sister alongside Aegon the Conqueror. The court might have its prejudices, but Lyanna found small victories in every nod of acknowledgement she wrested from those proud men. The Stormlands erupted first. A vanguard led by Lords Fell and Buckler crossed into the Kingswood, harassing merchants and travelers loyal to the crown. In response, a royal force under Ser Jon Connington rode out to quell the disturbance. Skirmishes broke out along the wooded roads, leaving bodies in shallow graves. Rumors said Robert himself was preparing to march north. Darkness loomed. The realm was on the brink of a full-scale civil war. News came that Tywin Lannister had not yet chosen a side, but was massing forces at Casterly Rock. The Lannisters were like a coiled lion, ready to pounce when they saw advantage. Dorne seethed, but Elia Martell and her children remained in King's Landing, effectively hostages to ensure Dornish compliance. The Reach, led by Mace Tyrell, made polite gestures of loyalty to the crown but moved its armies to the borders of the Stormlands, perhaps waiting to see if a swift victory could be achieved. Lyanna paced in her solar, restless as a caged animal. She felt the tension thrumming through the castle halls. Swords were sharpened, ravens fed, armor polished. Ned came to her with a letter from Winterfell, detailing how Brandon had called the Northern Banners. The Umbers, the Mormonts, the Karstarks, houses known for their ferocity in battle, were gathering. The North would march south to support their queen. "An army of wolves," Ned said quietly, handing her the letter. She read it, her heart heavy. "I never thought I'd be the cause for the North to march to war. All I ever wanted was—" She trailed off, uncertain how to phrase the longing that had once consumed her. Ned placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "All any of us wanted was to live our lives without madness or cruelty. But the world spun us in another direction. You are our queen, Lyanna, and we will stand by you." She closed her eyes, swallowing hard. "I know, Ned, and I'm grateful, but I can't shake the feeling that this was never truly my choice. The path was forced upon me, shaped by prophecy and politics." He squeezed her shoulder. "Prophecy might have set things in motion, but you're the one making choices now. And the North stands behind you." Outside the window, the rain had stopped, leaving the city shimmering in puddles of gold from the morning sun. Lyanna looked at the reflection of the sky in those puddles, imagining that each pool was a window to a different fate. In one, she saw herself riding free in the North, unwed, unfettered. In another, she was the dutiful wife of Robert Baratheon, forging a life that might have been filled with children and hunts and laughter. But here, in this reflection of reality, she was a queen teetering on the edge of a war that could reshape Westeros. She turned from the window, steadying her breath. "We have much to do. Let's begin." Over the next fortnight, events moved swiftly. A royal decree summoned loyal lords to gather near the capital, preparing for the possibility of marching on the Stormlands. Raven after raven arrived, bearing reports of troop movements. Robert had indeed left Storm's End, leading a host of fearsome knights and foot soldiers. The Crownland lords who once served the Targaryens out of habit now looked to Rhaegar and Lyanna with uncertainty, uncertain if they would be overshadowed by a rising Baratheon star. One morning, a breathless messenger burst into the throne room, announcing that Robert's forces had clashed with Jon Connington's men near a ford of the Wendwater. The news was mixed. Connington had held the ford, but at great cost, and Robert's forces had withdrawn with minimal losses. It seemed the Baratheon host was testing the waters, searching for weak spots. Lyanna conferred with Rhaegar, Barristan Selmy, and other generals. She insisted on understanding the battle plans, the supply lines. At first, some of the lords balked at explaining the intricacies of warfare to a woman. But Lyanna had grown up with brothers who talked of little else. She quickly absorbed the details, asked sharp questions, and made suggestions rooted in common sense. Bit by bit, she gained the grudging respect of the martial men around her. Rhaegar was no stranger to command, though his heart lay more in prophecy than in conquest. He led the strategy sessions with a calm intensity, but Lyanna often saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. If only there were a way to avert this bloodshed, that doubt seemed to say. If only the realm could be unified without these rivers of blood. But unity had slipped away like a dream. Robert was marching, the Stormlords rallied, and soon, the king and queen would have no choice but to meet them in open battle. The final straw came in the form of a letter from Tywin Lannister. It was delivered by an impeccably dressed courier, who presented it with a deep bow to Rhaegar and Lyanna in the council chamber. Tywin's words were measured, carefully phrased. He reminded them of the years he had served as hand, of the glories and prosperity he had brought to the realm. Then he made his demand. His daughter Cersei Lannister was to be betrothed to Rhaegar's heir, ensuring that the Lannisters would stand firm with the crown. In return, the gold of Casterly Rock and the swords of the Westerlands would join the royal host, crushing the Baratheon rebellion. Lyanna's pulse quickened when she read that line. Rhaegar's heir. The letter did not specify which heir, Alya's children, or any future child of Lyanna's. Cersei was near in age to Rhaenys, but the mention of the heir implied a male child. Aegon was just a toddler. Marriage to a Lannister seemed a distant notion, but it also cut Lyanna out of the succession conversation entirely. If Rhaegar and Elaya's children were recognized as the official heirs, what of Lyanna's claim, or any child she might bear in the future? Rhaegar rubbed his temple, exhaling slowly. Tywin is pushing us. He wants to bind the monarchy to the Lannisters once and for all. If we refuse, we risk the Westerlands marching with Robert. Lyanna took a breath, struggling to keep calm. If we agree, we essentially confirm Elaya's children as the rightful heirs. Oberyn will be pleased, but it also means my future children, if I have them, will be second in line at best. I am to be queen in name only. He turned to her, an apologetic light in his eyes. We cannot fight the Stormlands and the Westerlands together. Not if we want to avoid turning all the 7 kingdoms to ash. Perhaps we can negotiate some arrangement that protects your future rights. A swirl of emotion clouded Lyanna's mind. She remembered Oberyn's demands, recalled how precarious her position was. The crown on her head suddenly felt heavier than ever. Here was the South, devouring her with its endless greed and maneuvering. Was this truly worth the cost? She gazed at Rhaegar, then at Ned, who had remained silent. His stern, steady face revealed little, but she knew he was worried for her, for the North. Swallowing, she nodded. Very well. Negotiate. But let Tywin know I will not be cast aside. So negotiations began. Letters flew back and forth between King's Landing and Casterly Rock. Terms were hammered out, reworked, and hammered out again. In the end, a fragile agreement was reached. The Westerlands would join the crown against the Baratheons in exchange for the betrothal of Prince Aegon to Cersei Lannister. Oberyn bristled at the arrangement. He had hoped for a Dornish match for Aegon, but ultimately even he recognized the necessity of the alliance if they were to crush Robert swiftly. The die was cast. Robert Baratheon would face not just the Targaryen-Stark alliance, but the forces of Casterly Rock as well. War loomed on the horizon, and Lyanna Stark, Queen of the 7 Kingdoms, prepared herself for the tempest that would decide her fate and the fate of an entire realm. The day of battle came with a sky darkened by storm clouds, as though the heavens themselves raged at the prospect of kinslaying. Outside the walls of King's Landing stretched a patchwork of camps and banners. The crown's forces, augmented by Lannister spearmen and cavalry, formed lines on the rolling plains south of the Blackwater. Across the field, beneath banners emblazoned with the fiery heart of the Stormlands, Robert Baratheon's host had gathered, bolstered by lesser houses that pledged to his cause. From the ramparts of the city, Lyanna gazed upon the sea of steel. Thousands of men, thousands of lives in peril because of pride and fate. She took a breath and reminded herself that she was queen, that she must be strong. Rhaegar joined her, clad in armor of gleaming plate. Gone was the prince of music and prophecy. In his place stood a warrior grimly resolved to defend his crown. He gently touched Lyanna's hand. Soon we ride out to meet him. I have no illusions about how this day will end. Blood will be spilled, and if the gods are kind, we shall emerge victorious and spare the realm a prolonged war. Lyanna swallowed. I wish there were another way. So do I, Rhaegar said quietly. But Robert forced our hand. He would sooner see the throne destroyed than yield. My father planted seeds of hatred in him when he threatened your family. Now those seeds have borne dark fruit. Men were shouting below, mustering for the march. The Lannister cavalry under Lord Tywin's command formed a flank of red and gold, while the royal troops under Rhaegar bore the dragon of House Targaryen. Among them were contingents of northern bannermen, proudly displaying the dire wolf of House Stark. It was a strange alliance, wolves and lions and dragons, standing against the fury of the stag. Lyanna turned to find Ned approaching, dressed in light armor, a gray cloak pinned with the dire wolf sigil. She knew he despised war, but he would fight if it meant protecting her. All is readied, sister, he said. We ride at your command. Her heart pounded. She had never led an army into battle, nor had she ever wanted to. But circumstances demanded it. She nodded. Let's end this. If Robert will not stand down, then we will do what we must. With that, she and Rhaegar descended the ramparts and mounted their horses. The royal host advanced beyond the city gates, foot soldiers marching in tight ranks, cavalry banners flapping in the wind. The thunderheads rolled overhead, but the rain held off for now, leaving only a heavy humidity clinging to the air. It felt as though the entire world waited with bated breath. The two armies met on a wide field broken by gentle hills. In the distance, half hidden by the gloom of the gathering storm, Lyanna could see Robert's banner, a crowned stag on a golden field. Faintly, she heard war horns braying. Her horse, sensing her tension, snorted and shifted beneath her. Rhaegar spurred his mount forward a few paces, accompanied by a handful of knights bearing the king's standard. A squire raised a horn and blew a clarion call. Custom demanded a final chance for parley before the slaughter began, though rarely did it change the outcome. Robert emerged from his lines astride a massive warhorse, a fearsome warhammer strapped to his side. His armor gleamed darkly. Behind him rode lords who had cast their lot with House Baratheon, Lords Caron, Selwyn Tarth, and Estermont, among others. Robert halted within shouting distance. Rhaegar's voice carried over the field. "Robert Baratheon, one last time I bid you to stand down. End this madness and you shall have mercy." Robert snorted. "Mercy? You speak to me of mercy after you stole my betrothed, after your father burned and strangled good men? After you allied with Lannisters who only serve themselves?" He pointed his warhammer at Lyanna, who had drawn up beside Rhaegar. "You have twisted her mind, Targaryen, but she was mine. I will have her back, and this throne you cling to will fall." A pang of regret shot through Lyanna, but that regret turned swiftly to anger. "I will never be yours, Robert. You cannot claim me like a piece of property. I made my choice. Stand down, and you might yet live to find happiness elsewhere." Robert barked out a harsh laugh. "You stand behind dragon wings and lion claws, and you tell me to find happiness? The only happiness I'll find is the end of your false reign." He wheeled his horse around and galloped back to his lines, ending any hope of avoiding the clash. Rhaegar looked at Lyanna, sorrow and resolve mingling in his eyes. "Gods protect us both," he murmured, then raised his sword, signaling the charge. Trumpets blared, drums thundered, and the two armies surged forward like thunderheads colliding. Lyanna's heart hammered. She kicked her horse into a gallop, riding alongside knights whose lances bristled in the gray light. Arrows whistled through the sky, and the clash of steel erupted across the battlefield. The initial impact was a blur of chaos. Horses screamed, men shouted curses and prayers, and the metallic crunch of weapons meeting armor filled the air. Lyanna kept her seat by sheer force of will, slashing at adversaries who came too close. She had learned the sword in Winterfell's yard, but never had she experienced anything like this, a swirling melee of blood and mud and fear. She glimpsed Ned's figure in the fray, his sword flashing as he fought valiantly to protect the royal banner. She saw the Lannister cavalry sweep across the right flank, smashing into Robert's lines with disciplined force. On the left, the northern banner men pressed the attack, howling their fierce cries. Yet Robert's men fought with the fury of the storm, driven by their lord's passion. More than once, Lyanna saw the stag banner push back the crown's lines, only to be repelled by the weight of greater numbers. The field became a mass of trampled grass and churned to earth. Time lost meaning. All Lyanna knew was the thrum of blood in her veins, the ring of steel in her ears. She fought off an attacker, a knight roaring Baratheon slogans, before another took his place. She felt a sting as a sword grazed her arm, the warmth of blood trickling beneath her armor. But she did not falter. The wolf's blood in her howled for survival. Somewhere in the chaos, she saw Rhaegar astride his black stallion, locked in combat with a mounted knight bearing House Caron's nightingale sigil. Rhaegar's sword flashed silver, striking true, and the knight toppled. Then Robert appeared, like a force of nature, swinging his warhammer with devastating strength. Men scattered before him, as if he were a living battering ram. Lyanna urged her horse forward, desperate to reach Rhaegar's side. If Robert faced him alone, the day could be decided in one blow. The field between them was a quagmire of struggling bodies and fallen horses. She pressed on, ignoring the ache in her limbs, the terror clenching her heart. She arrived to see Rhaegar and Robert circling each other, battered and bloodied. Robert glared, chest heaving. Rhaegar's eyes burned with grim resolve. The storm clouds overhead finally unleashed their rain, fat droplets pelting the combatants and turning the field slick. Robert charged, hammer raised. Rhaegar caught the blow on his shield, the impact sounding like thunder. Sparks flew, and Rhaegar's horse staggered. With a cry, Lyanna spurred her mount, interposing herself between Robert and Rhaegar, raising her sword to deflect a second blow. The force of the warhammer numbed her arm, nearly knocking her from the saddle. Robert's eyes widened in shock and anger. "You dare?" he roared. "You fight for him against me?" Lyanna gritted her teeth, pushing against his hammer with her blade. Her voice shook with raw emotion. "I fight for myself, Robert. I fight for the realm. This is my choice. I am not your prize." He tried to wrench the hammer free, but she held fast, giving Rhaegar a moment to regain his balance. Then Robert twisted the hammer, hurling her sword aside. She felt agony burst across her shoulder as he struck. She tumbled from the saddle into the mud, gasping in pain. Before Robert could finish her, Rhaegar rallied. He lunged, sword slicing Robert's gauntlet. Robert howled, dropping the hammer for an instant. Lyanna scrambled away, half-blind with pain. Rhaegar pressed the advantage, delivering a second blow that slammed into Robert's breastplate. But Robert Baratheon was nothing if not tenacious. He seized the warhammer with his uninjured hand and swung upward. Rhaegar brought his sword down to parry, and the clash sent a shockwave through the rain-soaked air. The hammer's spike glanced off Rhaegar's thigh, drawing a spurt of blood. Staggering, Rhaegar faltered. Robert raised the hammer high for a finishing strike. Summoning every shred of her will, Lyanna threw herself at Robert's legs, tangling him for a crucial moment. His blow went wide, slamming into empty space. Rhaegar seized the opening to thrust his sword under Robert's lifted arm, piercing a gap in his armor. A strangled gasp tore from Robert's throat. He lurched, eyes wide with shock, then sank to his knees, blood soaking the rain-drenched mud. The battlefield around them erupted in chaos as Baratheon men realized their lord had fallen. Rhaegar stood over Robert, sword dripping crimson. Robert looked up at Lyanna with something akin to heartbreak in his gaze. You were meant to be mine," he rasped before his eyes rolled back and he collapsed, life ebbing away in the mud. Lyanna knelt, breathing in ragged gasps, her vision darkening. She was vaguely aware of Ned rushing to her side, shouting her name. Rhaegar called for a maester. The rain mixed with blood, turning the ground beneath them into a macabre slurry. But Robert Baratheon's rebellion died with him on that field. In the aftermath, the Baratheon forces scattered or surrendered. The Crown's victory was decisive, though hard-fought. Tywin Lannister's cavalry swept in, capturing fleeing knights. Distant thunder rumbled as if the gods were mourning the blood spilled that day. Lyanna faded in and out of consciousness, the pain in her shoulder pulsing. She saw glimpses, Ned's anxious face, Barristan and Selmy kneeling to press a cloth to her wound, Rhaegar gazing at Robert's body with something like regret etched into his features. Within hours, the battle concluded. Robert's loyal lords bent the knee or fled into exile. The horns of victory sounded across the field. King's Landing's gates opened to receive the wounded and triumphant alike. And Lyanna, borne on a litter, felt the rush of relief and sorrow swirl together. They had won. The rebellion was over. She was still queen, yet the price had been paid in blood by friend and foe alike. In the days that followed, the realm grappled with the aftermath. The Storm Lords sought pardon, naming Robert's younger brother Stannis as the new Lord of Storm's End. Rhaegar granted clemency to many who had fought against him, hoping to heal the divide. Lyanna's injuries slowly mended under the care of the maesters. Visitors came to pay respects or to seek favor. Some praised her courage in battle. Others murmured that a queen should never risk herself so recklessly. She brushed aside such concerns. She was no delicate flower in a glass garden. She was a wolf, and wolves fought when cornered. The North returned home, carrying tales of Lyanna's valor to Winterfell. The Lannisters, flush with victory, tightened their hold on royal councils. Tywin looked smug, certain that his house would reap the rewards of their loyalty. Dorne remained cool, content that Elaya's children maintained their rightful place in the succession. And Lyanna, in the quiet hours, wondered if the realm was truly at peace, or if more storms loomed just beyond the horizon. The Iron Islands, the Reach, the Vale. There were always new ambitions rising, new slights to avenge. That was the burden of the crown, endless vigilance. Still, the realm was intact. A measure of peace had been won, albeit at great cost. She stood on the Red Keep's highest tower one evening, gazing across King's Landing. Torches flickered in the streets, the hum of life continuing despite the recent bloodshed. Rhaegar joined her, silent for a time. Then he spoke, voice low. "We have victory, yet I can find no joy in it." Lyanna nodded. "Nor I." but at least the realm may know stability. No one can challenge our reign, not after seeing Robert's fate." He turned to her, a solemn softness in his eyes. "We were both shaped by forces beyond our control, but perhaps now we can shape the future by our own will." She gazed at him, recalling the hush of the Harrenhal tourney fields, the swirl of blue winter roses. She had once thought him a thief of her freedom, but now realized their fates were intertwined, forging something neither had expected. "Yes," she said softly, "we can try." And so Queen Lyanna Stark, crowned with roses and ice, stood at the cusp of a new dawn. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the perils of power and the ghosts of prophecy. Yet she wore her crown with the stubborn pride of the North, refusing to be owned by any man or tradition, determined to chart her own course. In every corner of the realm, bards would sing of the fierce wolf queen who fought beside her king on the battlefield, who refused to be caged by the dictates of lords. And though winter would one day come, as it always did, Lyanna Stark would meet it head-on. A queen born of ice and fire, forging a legacy that would outlast the storms of war. Lyanna Stark's shoulders still ached as she began each morning in the Red Keep Solar, determined to oversee the business of kingship alongside Rhaegar. In the weeks that followed Robert Baratheon's defeat, the realm seemed to sigh with relief that open warfare had concluded. Yet beneath that sigh lay a simmering tension, for no kingdom forgets bloodshed so easily. The maester swore her wound was healing well, but at night, when she lay awake listening to the distant hush of the Blackwater, she would feel a deep ache there that sometimes spread into her chest. It reminded her that everything they had done, every life lost, was now part of her story, woven into a tapestry she could not unravel. She found herself paying more visits to the royal library tucked deep within the Red Keep. She would walk among the shelves, letting her fingers trace the spines of histories and treatises. The fresh script of new Raven reports awaited her each day, but she preferred older texts where the tragedies of past kings and queens had already been sealed by time. Studying the mistakes of those who had ruled before might save her from repeating them. When she tired of dusty scrolls, she took her rest in the Godwood, kneeling before that small southern weirwood, knowing its roots were but an echo of the vast heart trees of her homeland. Sometimes she felt their old presence stirring, as though the gods watched her through the carved face in the trunk, judging her choices in this land of sun-baked stone. While she recovered, Rhaegar conducted royal audiences in the throne room. He would sit upon the Iron Throne in full regalia, the clang of mailed guards echoing off the walls as petitioners entered. She joined him whenever her strength allowed, seated on a smaller throne placed beside his. Though the South was not used to the sight of two monarchs ruling together, it was becoming a pattern, a dragon crowned in gold and rubies, and a wolf queen, her dark hair woven in a single braid that fell over one shoulder, a simple circlet of silver resting against her brow. The first few audiences after the battle were rife with contrition and carefully disguised anger. Lords who had once served Robert approached with lowered heads, offering oaths of fealty to their majesties Rhaegar and Lyanna. Some trembled, fearful that defiance would be punished by the same blade that slew their rebellious liege. Others stood stiff and silent, swallowing resentment behind fixed smiles. Tywin Lannister maintained his calm control, stationed at Rhaegar's side as unofficial advisor. He was not yet named Hand. Some whispered that Rhaegar hesitated to grant him so much power, but he influenced every major decision in practice. His green eyes flicked between petitioners like a man surveying a chessboard. Oberyn Martell was another constant in the throne room. He stayed in King's Landing to safeguard Alya's interests, though his presence bristled with tension. Whenever he looked at Lyanna, the subtle curl of his lip reminded her he had not forgiven the humiliation visited upon his sister. Still, he made no overt moves against Lyanna or Rhaegar. The new alliance with the Lannisters and the devastation in the Stormlands had proven that the crown was stronger than many might have assumed. Lyanna forced herself to smile politely through endless petitioners' pleas. One after another they came, farmers pleading for aid after their fields were trampled, lesser lords disputing border claims or the spoils of victory. She would speak quietly with Rhaegar, conferring her judgment or perspective. He listened to her counsel without dismissing it, and bit by bit the court grew used to her voice. They were not always pleased, but they knew she was no figurehead. Lore might someday call her the wolf who wore a crown, and for now it seemed enough to keep them wary. She had her own matters to address too. Disturbing rumors drifted from the Neck and the swamps around Moat Cailin, sightings of broken men or bandits who claimed to have fought for Robert and refused to bend the knee. Ned insisted that the North would handle these remnants of rebellion swiftly and justly. He left King's Landing within a fortnight of the final victory, riding north with a small retinue of Stark men, promising to quell any unrest. She was sorry to see him go. Ned was her calm center in a sea of southern intrigues, but she knew he was needed. House Stark must remain strong for both her sake and the North's. With Brandon ruling from Winterfell and Ned enforcing peace, her homeland might avoid the chaos that was all too common when wars ended in half-finished truces. There was another matter that gnawed at Lyanna's conscience: what to do with Robert's bastard children, if any existed. The man had been known for his appetites and had roamed half the countryside before and during his betrothal to her. Whispers reached the Red Keep that there might be a young girl in the Stormlands, fathered by Robert upon a tavern wench, or a lad rumored to carry his blood in the Crownlands. Lyanna felt a small stab of guilt each time she heard such talk. She had not wanted Robert's death, only an end to his war. But now, these children bore the shame of a lost rebellion and a dead father. When she asked Rhaegar about it, he paused thoughtfully. They agreed that any child proven to be Robert's would not be persecuted. Rather, they would be offered the crown's protection and perhaps found a place in a noble household. Cruelty to bastards was too common a sin among the great houses. She wanted no part of it. Though Tywin Lannister privately counseled against coddling Baratheon blood, Rhaegar supported Lyanna's decision, believing it better to defuse any spark of future dissent. Elia Martell remained in the Red Keep. She stayed mostly in her own apartments, where her children, Rhaenys and Aegon, played under the watchful eyes of Dornish guards. Lyanna rarely saw her. On the occasions they crossed paths in the corridors, Elia would incline her head politely, but her eyes stayed distant. Lyanna felt an awkward tug inside her chest, aware that Elia had been displaced in many ways. The realm recognized Elia as the king's first wife, mother to the royal heirs, but it was Lyanna who shared the throne and official rule. The Targaryen custom that once allowed multiple marriages was not well understood by most in Westeros. In reality, Rhaegar's father had never made such an arrangement a matter of law, only of possibility. Yet events had moved too quickly, and now the entire realm found itself grappling with the ramifications. One afternoon, Lyanna braced herself and decided to seek Elia out. She arrived at the princess's apartments escorted by a single guard who remained at the door. Within, she found Elia curled on a window seat, reading a volume of Dornish poetry. A brazier glowed in the corner to chase away the autumn chill. The children were nowhere to be seen, likely at lessons or play. Elia's face grew guarded at Lyanna's entrance, but she placed a silk ribbon in her book and set it aside. "Your Grace," Elia said, rising to bow. She wore a robe of deep red embroidered with suns. There was a slight pallor to her cheeks, and Lyanna recalled the talk that Elia's health had always been delicate. Lyanna inclined her head in return, feeling strangely like an intruder. "Princess Elia, I wanted to see how you were faring. If there is anything you need, you have but to say." Elia's lips curved in a careful smile, though not unkind. "You are generous. I have all that I require." Lyanna glanced around the room. The tapestries bore the Martell sun and spear, a respectful gesture to her lineage. Various cushions and small tables lined the walls, and the window overlooked the city, just as her own did. She forced herself to speak evenly, though her heart was pounding. "I know our arrangement is unconventional. I regret any pain it has caused you or your children." Elia studied her, dark eyes unreadable. "You regret it, but regret does not alter the present. My children and I remain wards here, effectively hostages to Dorne's good behavior, however politely that status is dressed up." The bluntness stung, but Lyanna did not deny it. "I cannot change what was set in motion by the late king. Rhaegar tries to bridge the gap. He has not exiled you or—" "No," Elia interrupted, her tone not harsh but weary. "He has not exiled me, but our bond, once so full of possibility, has been turned into a twisted thread. I loved him once. I suppose part of me still does. We share 2 children. But in truth, his mind is set on prophecy and destiny, and I do not know my place anymore." Lyanna lowered her gaze, uncertain how to respond. She remembered Rhaegar's unwavering conviction that a child born of ice and fire would be the realm's savior. She recalled her own defiance, insisting she not be merely a second wife hidden away. Elia was now the one on the fringes. She took a breath and ventured quietly. "Dorne remains integral to the realm's peace. Oberyn has told us as much fiercely. If you or your children ever feel threatened, I vow to protect you. Our futures are entwined whether we wish it or not." Elia arched a delicate brow as though testing the sincerity of those words. I have no illusions that we are friends, but perhaps we can avoid being enemies. Rhaenys and Aegon, they are innocent in all this. I would see them live in a realm where they do not fear the dagger in the dark. Lyanna gave a slight nod. I want that as well. They remain recognized as heirs. If anything should befall Rhaegar, I would honor that line of succession. Elia studied her another moment, then inclined her head. Thank you. Truly. May the gods grant us no more tragedies. She picked up her book and resumed her seat near the window, a gentle dismissal. Lyanna understood and withdrew. Outside, the guard waited with a mild curiosity on his face, but he offered no comment. She left with a conflicted heaviness, wondering if any peace between her and Elia was possible. Yet they had not spoken in open hostility, perhaps that was a start. As the moon turned through phases, the realm steadied itself. Merchants returned to the roads, grateful that the main highways were safer. Gendry, the rumored bastard of Robert Baratheon in the Crownlands, was quietly placed as an apprentice to the city's master armorer, paid for by a discreet royal stipend. Another rumored Baratheon child was found in the Stormlands, a girl named Bella who had fostered with a minor knight. She likewise received a small allowance to ensure she would not starve. These gestures of mercy earned Lyanna a subtle measure of goodwill among the common folk, even if the nobles sneered at such softness. Not all tidings were positive. The Vale, ruled by Jon Arryn, had remained neutral in the war but had provided quiet support to House Stark's position before the final clash. Now rumors suggested that Lord Arryn felt uneasy about Targaryen rule. Memories of the Mad King's cruelty still lingered. The Iron Islands began to stir under Balon Greyjoy, for the Ironborn always tested the boundaries of new reigns. Raiders had been sighted off the western coast, harassing Lannister and Tyrell merchant ships. The crown demanded an end to this lawlessness, but the Ironborn had seldom bowed willingly to any royal decree. A fresh conflict brewed, and Tywin Lannister, eager to prove the value of his alliance, pressed for a swift, punishing response. Rhaegar called a war council to address the Iron Islands. In a stuffy chamber near the Red Keep's map room, the principal lords and commanders gathered. Lyanna attended, refusing to be sidelined. The table was spread with parchment maps of Westeros and the rocky archipelago of the Iron Islands. A hush fell as Rhaegar, clad in a sober black tunic, laid out the situation. Ironborn raiders had attacked Lannisport vessels and even harried the coasts of the Reach. Lord Balon Greyjoy disclaimed responsibility, calling them rogue captains beyond his control. But many suspected he privately encouraged them. Tywin Lannister's voice cut through the hush. This cannot stand. My ships and trade routes are threatened. The Greyjoys test the crown's might, hoping to catch us divided after Robert's fall. We must strike swiftly, by land and sea, show them no mercy. Oberyn Martell leaned forward, expression sly. Does the crown truly wish another war so soon? We have just put down a major rebellion. Is it not wise to strengthen our power first, confirm alliances, and ensure our coffers can support a naval campaign? Tywin's face hardened. Allowing these raids to continue only emboldens the Ironborn. We must not show weakness. Rhaegar glanced at Lyanna. She could feel the room's attention shift toward her, as though she alone might tip the balance. Maester Pycelle watched her with beady eyes. Varys stood unobtrusive in the background, ever the spider. She swallowed, recalling the history of the Greyjoy rebellion that had occurred in another timeline she had read about. The Ironborn rarely changed. Their lords might bend a knee, but their hearts yearned for the old ways. She took a measured breath. War is expensive. We've poured blood and gold into quelling Robert's uprising. Our fields and roads still bear scars from that conflict. Yet if we do nothing, we risk the realm's confidence in the crown. I suggest we send envoys to Pike with a stern warning. If Balon does not hand over these raiders, we will consider it an act of open defiance. Tywin gave a curt nod. Indeed, an ultimatum. And if he refuses, we bring war upon his islands before they can gather more strength. Rhaegar studied the map, then looked to Barristan Selmy and other knights. The royal fleet is not large enough to storm Pike alone. We would require the support of the Redwyne fleet or perhaps the Lannister ships out of Lannisport. Tywin did not hesitate. The Westerlands will commit ships, and the Reach can be compelled to join if Mace Tyrell wishes to remain in favor. He owes us for the privileges he has enjoyed at court. Oberyn let out a near-silent sigh, but did not object. Finally, Rhaegar nodded. Send the ultimatum. If Balon refuses, we will act decisively. He turned to Lyanna. We will need the Stark's might if the Ironborn attempt any raids on the northern coast near Sea Dragon Point. You know your people best. She inclined her head. I will dispatch ravens to Winterfell, ensuring the North's readiness. Inwardly, she felt a pang. Another potential war, more blood on the horizon. But this was the burden of the crown. The realm was never still. As the council broke up, Tywin lingered to speak with Rhaegar in hushed tones, likely pressing for further expansions of Lannister influence. Oberyn departed, his long strides carrying him away, frustration etched on his face. Lyanna quietly slipped out, accompanied by Barristan Selmy. He walked beside her with an easy grace that belied his years. My queen, Barristan said politely, you did well to counsel caution alongside resolve. The realm is fortunate to have a ruler who does not rush blindly into war. Lyanna sighed. We'll see if fortune holds. The Ironborn are not easily swayed by threats. This could become another costly campaign. The realm may soon tire of warfare. Barristan nodded, his kind eyes reflecting understanding. They say that in war, battles are the easy part. It's the peace afterward that proves more difficult. She found a grim irony in that statement. Peace was her aim, yet everything about ruling seemed to lead her to the brink of another battle. She made her way up the winding corridors, feeling a persistent ache in her wounded shoulder. The maesters had told her the pain might linger for moons to come, a bodily memory of the war that had crowned her. Sometimes she welcomed it, a reminder that she was no dream queen perched in a high tower, but a Stark who had bled in the mud with her sword in hand. In the weeks that followed, letters flew back and forth between the Crown and Pike. The Iron Islands, typically aloof, responded with cryptic denials. Balon Greyjoy insisted the raiders acted without his consent and that his island lords were too fractious to be easily controlled. Tywin Lannister growled that such excuses were worthless. Meanwhile, Rhaegar quietly built alliances with the Tyrells, persuading Mace Tyrell to deploy a portion of the Reach's fleet to the Sunset Sea. The threat of a multi-pronged blockade around the Iron Islands began to materialize. Yet, as the realm braced for possible naval conflict, another matter pressed upon the court. Whispers spread that Queen Lyanna herself might be with child. Courtiers noted her pale complexion in the mornings, the way she sometimes pressed a hand to her belly, or how the royal seamstress had discreetly let out her gowns. It was speculation at first. King's Landing was ever rife with rumors, but soon the talk intensified. Maester Pycelle, always eager to ingratiate himself with the monarchy, came to Lyanna one morning, offering gentle inquiries about her health. She gave him guarded answers, uncertain of the truth herself. Indeed, she had felt queasy some mornings and missed her courses, but she did not relish confirming the rumors until she was certain. Eventually, she allowed Pycelle to examine her, watching his face as he checked her pulse and peered into her eyes by candlelight. He nodded gravely, a slight hint of a smile on his wrinkled lips. Your Grace, I believe congratulations are in order. You carry an heir. Lyanna pressed her palms against the table, exhaling slowly. Many emotions churned within her: fear, a fierce protectiveness, and something like awe. She'd been a rebellious northern girl once, refusing any southern entanglements. Now she was queen, pregnant with a potential Targaryen Stark child who, if prophecy was to be believed, might be part of Rhaegar's grand design. But prophecy or no prophecy, this child was hers, flesh of her flesh. She thought of her mother, who had borne 4 living children, and she wished she could speak with her once more, glean advice about motherhood in the midst of power. When word spread through the Red Keep that the queen was with child, the atmosphere of court shifted. Some took it as a joyous sign, a new generation to secure the realm's stability. Others, notably Oberyn Martell, viewed it with suspicion, worried that any child of Lyanna's might supplant Elaya's children. Rhaenys and Aegon were older, yes, but a child born of a king and a queen was a potent claim. Tywin Lannister offered formal congratulations but swiftly pivoted to the question of betrothal alliances, always thinking of House Lannister's future. Dorne's envoys grew more watchful, and even the small folk in Flea Bottom gossiped about the new babe who might be half-wolf, half-dragon. Rhaegar's reaction was quietly reverent. He came to Lyanna's solar one evening, took her hands in his, and simply said, "You have given me a gift beyond measure." She saw the flicker of that old intensity in his eyes, the gleam of prophecy. Yet she also saw genuine warmth. This was the father of her unborn child, a man who bore the weight of so many expectations on his shoulders that sometimes she wondered if he remembered how to breathe freely. She murmured thanks, uncertain how else to respond. Their marriage remained a strange bond forged by politics and a half-shared dream. But within that bond, perhaps a gentler affection was beginning to stir. Still, nothing about pregnancy lessened the demands of the crown. The heir-born continued their intransigence. Balon Greyjoy sent a missive disclaiming responsibility once again, while reports arrived that a reaver from the Iron Islands had sacked a Lannisport merchant ship in the seas off Fair Isle. Tywin Lannister seethed. Rhaegar and Lyanna conferred with him in a small council meeting, deciding at last that enough was enough. Barristan Selmy, Sir Jon Connington, and a host of loyal knights would travel west to coordinate a blockade with the Red Wine Fleet. If Balon refused to yield the raiders, the royal forces would invade. Lyanna was not delighted at the prospect, but she accepted the necessity. Soon after, an unforeseen visitor arrived at court. Euron Greyjoy, exiled brother of Balon, known to be a cunning and dangerous figure. He swept into King's Landing on a battered ship bearing a flamboyant manor and a single uncovered eye, the other hidden beneath a patch. His arrival caused a stir among the courtiers. Euron's reputation was that of a pirate, a sorcerer, and a man without scruple. Yet he presented himself as a penitent who wished to avoid war between the Iron Islands and the Crown. He brought gifts of strange curiosities from distant lands, an ornate horn rumored to control dragons, priceless Myrish tapestries depicting long-lost Valyria. Rhaegar and Lyanna received him in the throne room, uncertain whether to be intrigued or alarmed. Euron knelt extravagantly, swirling his cloak. "Your graces, I come bearing counsel. My brother Balon is a fool. He thinks he can defy dragons and wolves without consequence. I offer you a chance to save bloodshed. If you let me replace Balon as Lord of the Iron Islands, you shall have a loyal subject. We need not waste ships and men on an invasion. A quiet coup can solve your problems." Lyanna watched him carefully. Everything about him felt slippery, untrustworthy, but also undeniably charismatic. She could sense the tension in the throne room as lords and courtiers glanced at each other. Rhaegar's voice remained measured. "You propose that we support you in seizing Pike, thus toppling your brother, in return for your fealty." Euron's smile was all sharp edges. "Exactly, your grace. A simple trade. The heir-born follow strength, and I am more apt to lead them in a profitable alliance with the crown. You would have no further cause for war, and I, of course, would gain the seat of House Greyjoy." Tywin Lannister observed from one side, face stony. Oberyn Martell's expression was as grim as ever. Lyanna spoke into the silence. "Why should we trust that you'd keep the heir-born in line any better than Balon? Your reputation precedes you. Piracy, exile, scandal. How do we know you will not be a worse nuisance?" Euron gave her an elegant half-bow. "My queen, I have sailed the world and seen wonders. I know how power shifts and how swiftly a tide can turn. I respect the dragon's might and yours. The Iron Islands under my rule would revere the throne that grants us prosperity. Should you choose not to accept my offer, you may roll the dice with Balon's warlike ambitions. Perhaps you'll defeat him, likely so, but not without cost. And who knows what allies might surface to back him." Rhaegar's gaze flicked to Tywin, then to Barristan and Varys. The tension was palpable. The idea of installing Euron as a puppet lord overshadowed by the crown had a certain strategic appeal. Yet the risk of supporting a man rumored to be insane or worse weighed heavily. After a long pause, Rhaegar's tone was cool. "We shall consider your proposal, Lord Euron, or do you claim that title yet?" Euron laughed lightly. "Not yet, your grace. I am but your humble subject, offering a path of minimal bloodshed." With that, he bowed again and was escorted out by gold cloaks. The council erupted in debate afterward. Tywin demanded a swift invasion, calling Euron a snake. Oberyn, ironically, suggested letting the snake slip in and poison Balon from within, thereby saving the crown a great deal of trouble. Barristan Selmy urged caution, warning that they knew little of Euron's true capabilities. Varys, speaking softly, noted that Euron's presence might be an opportunity to sow discord among the heir-born, weakening them no matter which brother emerged the victor. Lyanna found her own mind torn. She loathed the idea of unleashing Euron on the Iron Islands, but the alternative was a full-scale campaign that might drag on for months, draining resources and costing more lives. Already, local fishermen and small folk along the western shores were clamoring for royal protection. She had pledged to protect the people, and now that pledge forced her to weigh moral compromise against the brutality of open conflict. Rhaegar met her eyes across the table, reading her dilemma. At last, he spoke quietly. If we sponsor Euron in a coup, we risk replacing one monster with another. But if we invade, we risk many lives lost and a potential quagmire. The realm is weary of blood. I am weary of it as well. Tywin's lips pressed thin. Your Grace, a direct show of force demonstrates that you will not broker deals with pirates and kinslayers. It cements your reputation. Sometimes fear is necessary for stability. Oberyn's voice came in a mocking drawl. Yes, fear is an excellent motivator. It's always worked so well for Targaryens in the past, hasn't it? Let's not forget how fear turned out for the Mad King. A small wave of tension followed that remark. Rhaegar's expression hardened, but he let the comment pass. Lyanna touched Rhaegar's arm gently. Let us send word to Balon Greyjoy that his brother is here, offering terms. Perhaps that alone may force Balon to come to the table. If he refuses, we have our answer. If he tries to silence Euron, we will know the depth of that hostility. Varys nodded approval. Tywin appeared less than thrilled but conceded it might buy them time to gather more ships. Thus concluded the latest crisis, unresolved but temporarily stalled. In the midst of these machinations, Lyanna's pregnancy advanced. She felt the stirrings of life within her, sometimes fluttering when she was tense in a council session. At night, she dreamed of dire wolves running through snow and dragons breathing fire into a star-filled sky. She wondered if the child inside her would indeed be the song of ice and fire Rhaegar so fervently believed in. She thought of Elaya's children, Aegon, named for the conqueror, and sweet Rhaenys with her dark Dornish eyes. Would they resent this new sibling? Would Oberyn see it as a threat to their inheritance? She tried not to let anxiety fester. Instead, she channeled her energies into practical matters of governance. She corresponded with Brandon and Ned, ensuring that winter stores in the north were replenished. She conferred with the Master of Coin on the royal treasury, wincing at the staggering costs of maintaining armies and fleets. She even found time to walk the streets of King's Landing in disguise, accompanied only by a couple of trusted guards. It was a risk, but she refused to remain cloistered. She visited blacksmiths, bakers, seamstresses, listening to the murmurs of common folk. While some grumbled about new taxes or the lingering smell of the gutters, others spoke of relief that the rebellion had ended swiftly, that King's Landing had not become a battlefield. A few even praised the Wolf Queen, who had fought in the mud to protect them. These small victories brought her fleeting moments of satisfaction, but the realm's undercurrents remained unpredictable. Tensions with Dorne persisted. Oberyn sparred verbally with Tywin in every council meeting, and Elaya's quiet sorrow filled the Red Keep's corridors like a ghost. The Lannisters demanded more influence, pushing to appoint Kevin Lannister as Master of Laws. Mace Tyrell angled for royal favors, brandishing the might of Highgarden's food supply in subtle threats. The Vale held aloof, while the Riverlands tried to mend from the damage inflicted by passing armies. And always, like a shifting shadow, the question of the Iron Islands loomed. One night, Rhaegar sent for Lyanna to meet him atop the ramparts near Maegor's Holdfast. A pale moon illuminated the stones, and a crisp wind fluttered the torches. She found him gazing at the city lights below, lost in thought. He turned when she approached, a faint smile touching his lips. "I've been thinking of the child," he said softly. "Our child. Do you recall the vision I once spoke of, the prophecy that consumed me? One that led me to believe a child born of ice and fire could save us all from the darkness beyond our ken." She folded her arms, the night breeze tugging at her hair. "I remember. You said it was part of an old prophecy from ancient texts. The prince that was promised." "Yes," Rhaegar murmured. "Some interpret the prophecy to mean it is one child. Others believe it refers to a lineage, a union of bloodlines that might bring forth a champion in time. My father twisted prophecy into madness, yet I still believe there is a thread of truth in it. The darkness is out there, beyond the wall, perhaps, or beyond the narrow sea. One day it may strike at the realm. We need unity, not fragmentation." Lyanna laid a hand over her rounded belly. She felt the child move, just a small shifting inside her. "I don't know if this child will be the savior of the world, Rhaegar. I only know that it will be ours, and we must protect it from the ambitions of those around us." He gently covered her hand with his own. "And we shall. The crown is not just a seat of power, it is a bulwark for the people. That includes our children and Elaya's children and all those caught in the winds of fate. We must stand fast." She searched his face, seeing a new determination there. Sometimes she glimpsed the shy harper he had been at Harrenhal, the man who sang ballads of sorrow. Other times she saw the warrior who slew Robert Baratheon, sorrow etched into every stroke of his sword. Now she saw a father resolved to shield their unborn child from the turmoil that courtiers and lords might unleash. She squeezed his hand, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared burden. But peace in the realm was always fleeting. Within a fortnight, news arrived that Balon Greyjoy had publicly denounced Euron as a traitor and sworn to hang him if he ever set foot on Pike. Another letter from Balon to the crown insisted he would not tolerate Targaryen meddling in Ironborn affairs. Raiders continued to strike along the coasts, targeting Lannister shipping and Tyrell supply fleets. The line was drawn. Reluctantly, Rhaegar and Lyanna approved a partial blockade. The crown's ships, joined by Lannister vessels, began patrolling the waters around the Iron Islands. Euron Greyjoy vanished from King's Landing. Varys hinted that he might be gathering his own band of cutthroats, waiting for the opportune moment to attack Balon from the shadows. With Euron gone, the uneasy tension in the Red Keep abated, replaced by the cool resolve of a realm gearing up for yet another confrontation. Meanwhile, the seasons turned. Autumn's chill began to creep in, heralding the possibility of an early winter. The small folk prayed for a short winter, or at least that it might delay its arrival. Lyanna, raised in the north, could sense the shift in the winds. She felt a longing for Winterfell's crisp snows and silent forests, though she doubted she would see them again anytime soon. Her pregnancy demanded she stay near the Red Keep's maesters. She recalled her mother's stories of how traveling while heavily pregnant could be dangerous. Despite her wolf's heart, she had responsibilities to her unborn child. As the leaves turned golden in the Crownlands, Rhaegar summoned his principal bannermen and allies to plan the campaign against Balon Greyjoy. Lyanna sat with him through long discussions. Mace Tyrell arrived in splendor, trailed by a host of knights in green and gold livery. Tywin Lannister brought a retinue of crimson-cloaked soldiers, and Kevan Lannister accompanied him, quietly efficient. Lords from the Riverlands, the Westerlands, and the Crownlands debated strategy with the king and queen. Most believed a swift strike at Pike itself would quell Balon's ambition. But to assault Pike, one needed a strong navy or a cunning infiltration. House Greyjoy's seat was famously difficult to storm by land. Barristan and Selmy advocated for a coordinated naval blockade, followed by landings on the smaller isles Old Wyke, Saltcliffe, Harlaw, cutting off Pike from support. Jon Connington recommended a bolder approach, a direct assault on Pike while the Ironborn were still disorganized. Tywin favored a combination, pressing from multiple directions to ensure total collapse of Greyjoy's resistance. Lyanna listened, occasionally asking pointed questions about supply lines and the readiness of their troops. In the midst of talk of war, she felt the child in her belly shift again, as if reminding her that time was short. The final plan was a compromise: blockade the main approach to Pike while Lannister-led forces landed on surrounding islands, capturing them methodically. If Balon refused to surrender, the Crown's navy, bolstered by the red wine ships from the Reach, would converge on Pike itself. Rhaegar appointed Barristan and Selmy to command a contingent of royal knights for the campaign. Connington would lead another group. Tywin would oversee the Lannister fleets, ensuring they cooperated smoothly with the Crown's admirals. Mace Tyrell returned to Highgarden to gather more ships and men, though he complained about the cost. Throughout it all, Oberyn Martell watched with cool detachment, as if the entire matter were a northern or western problem, not Dornish. Before the forces departed, Rhaegar arranged a tourney to lift morale, a lesser-scale event compared to the extravagance of Harrenhal, but still a grand spectacle for King's Landing. Lyanna could not ride in the lists as she might have in a past life. Instead, she watched from the royal gallery, dressed in a flowing gown that draped around her pregnant form. The child was close enough to term that she felt heavy, her feet sore if she stood too long. Rhaegar sat beside her, wearing a reflective expression. The knights tilted lances, the crowd cheered, and for a brief moment it seemed as though the realm was at peace, enjoying the sport. But behind the spectacle lay the knowledge that many of these knights would sail west soon, risking their lives in battle against the Ironborn. Some might not return. Lyanna could see it in their eyes, the quiet determination, the flicker of fear disguised as bravado. Even the small folk sensed the uncertain future. When one young knight, a newly anointed lad from the Crownlands, won a series of justs, he rode before Lyanna and placed a small bouquet of winter roses at her feet, an echo of a memory that made her chest tighten. She managed a polite smile. Winter roses had once been her favorite, but the sight of them now reminded her how far she had come from that bright, reckless girl at Harrenhal. Soon the day of departure arrived. The harbor bustled with ships bearing Lannister, Tyrell, and royal banners. A forest of masts swayed on the waves. Crowds gathered at the docks, shouting well wishes or tearful goodbyes. On the quay, Rhaegar conferred with Barristan Selmy and Jon Connington for the last time, ensuring all was in order. Tywin Lannister, regal in his crimson cloak, boarded his flagship to oversee the fleets. The gulls shrieked overhead as though mocking the notion of human war. Lyanna stood watching from a vantage on the castle walls, her cloak wrapped around her, the autumn wind tangling her hair. She tried not to let fear gnaw at her. The child was due within a moon's turn, perhaps sooner. She prayed that Rhaegar would not need to lead the attack in person, that the conflict could be contained without the king's presence. But she knew how war was unpredictable and merciless. She returned to her chambers, sinking into a chair with a weary sigh. The babe kicked inside her, almost as if to say it was still there, still safe. She pressed a hand to her belly, murmuring soothing words. She did not think of herself as the gentle sort, but motherhood was changing her in ways she could not have anticipated. She yearned for this child to be born into a realm not perpetually overshadowed by war. Days stretched into weeks, and news from the west arrived slowly. Balon Greyjoy had refused any final entreaties for peace. The crown's blockade began in earnest, capturing or sinking Ironborn raiders. One by one, smaller isles fell to the combined Lannister and Tyrell forces, though not without bloodshed. Balon withdrew his warriors to Pike, defiant. Rumors spread that Euron Greyjoy lurked somewhere with his own ships waiting to strike. Barristan Selmy wrote detailed letters describing how savage the Ironborn could be, attacking from hidden coves, melting back into the sea. No one knew how long it would take to break their spirit. Through it all, the strain on Lyanna grew. Late one afternoon, as she was hearing petitions in the throne room, a sudden wave of pain washed through her. She gasped, clutching the arm of the throne. Courtiers froze, some rushing forward in alarm. Maester Pycelle stepped forth at once, calling for midwives. Rhaegar, who had been in a side chamber consulting with Tyrell envoys, dashed into the hall, his face stricken with concern. Lyanna felt a deep cramp again, and heat rose to her face. The babe was coming early, or so it seemed. She was carried to her bedchamber, where the midwives and maesters assembled in frantic haste. The pain ebbed and flowed like the tide, each wave stronger than the last. She clutched at the sheets, trying to breathe. Outside, she heard the murmurs of servants and the concerned hush of lords. Rhaegar hovered close, his hand gripping hers when the contractions worsened. Hours passed in a haze. Sweat beaded on her brow, her hair clung to her neck. She thought of her own mother, of the cost of bringing life into the world. A primal fear and exhilaration warred within her. Near midnight, under the flickering light of candles, Lyanna screamed through the final wave of agony, and the child was born. A rush of relief and exhaustion overwhelmed her. She heard the babe's cry, thin and piercing, echo off the stone walls. Maester Pycelle and the midwives bustled about, cleaning the newborn, murmuring words of thanks to the seven. Rhaegar, tears shining in his violet eyes, pressed a trembling kiss to Lyanna's forehead. "It's a boy," whispered a midwife, wrapping the infant in soft linens. She placed him in Lyanna's arms. Lyanna stared down at the tiny face, flushed and scrunched from the ordeal of birth. A shock of dark hair crowned his head, reminiscent of her own. But in the candlelight, she thought she glimpsed a hint of Targaryen silver near the temples. Or perhaps that was merely the reflection of the flame. She felt tears slipping down her cheeks. So much had changed, so many battles fought, so many alliances twisted. But here, in her arms, was life anew. Rhaegar gently touched the child's cheek, speechless for a moment. Then he whispered, "Our son." Lyanna closed her eyes, cradling the child. For all the prophecies and politics that had shaped their union, in this instant all she felt was fierce love for the fragile creature she held. Here was a new soul, untouched by the feuds and intrigues that plagued the realm. As dawn broke over King's Landing, the city learned of the prince's birth. Bells tolled in celebration, and those who had once doubted the Wolf Queen now spoke with amazement of the child who might unite the blood of the dragon and the wolf. Rhaegar announced the boy's name, Aemon, in honor of the wise Prince Aemon Targaryen of old, though some had expected him to name the babe after Aegon or Jaehaerys. Lyanna accepted it without protest. She found the name pleasant enough, and it carried a certain gravitas. Aemon Targaryen, Prince of the Seven Kingdoms. No sooner had the cheers subsided than whispers began regarding succession. Where did this newborn prince stand in relation to Elaya's son, Aegon? Was Aegon still the heir, as the older child? Or might the crown treat Lyanna's son differently, since she and Rhaegar reigned as king and queen together? The question sparked new tensions. Oberyn Martell, hearing the babe's birth announced, made no public statement but locked himself in his chambers for a day. Elia was heard to remark quietly that she wished only for peace, but her sorrow was plain when she looked upon the new infant. Lyanna, still recovering in her chambers, cared little for the speculation. She had done her duty as queen, but she also had done something for herself, something that had awakened a new tenderness in her. She lay back against the pillows, the babe resting on her chest, lulled by her heartbeat. She thought of Winterfell, of the heart trees and the swirling snow, and she whispered, "I will protect you, little one. I promise." Rhaegar stood by, his face alight with wonder. From time to time he mentioned prophecy, the significance of the child's birth. But Lyanna could barely hear him over the hush of her own love. In that moment she was a mother first, a queen second. Perhaps prophecy had shaped their fates, yet for the child she vowed to carve out a kinder future. Days later, as she regained strength, she finally permitted courtiers to enter and pay homage to the newborn prince. Mace Tyrell arrived in grand fashion, bearing gifts of gold-threaded blankets and promising a bountiful harvest from the reach and honor of the child. Tywin Lannister, still in the west dealing with the blockade, sent an ornate cradle carved from rare weirwood, a subtle attempt to please both Targaryen and Stark sensibilities. Oberyn Martell came in person, bowing formally. He studied the child with an inscrutable expression, then offered a small necklace of Dornish design. For the prince, he said, voice devoid of warmth, but not hostile either. Lyanna accepted it with a polite nod. Elia, too, was brought to see the child. She moved slowly, as if uncertain of her place. Rhaenys and little Aegon trailed behind her, eyes wide. Lyanna felt a pang of awkwardness. Would these children see Aemon as a rival? Elia approached the cradle and gazed down at the sleeping babe. Lyanna watched her closely, bracing for resentment. Instead, Elia sighed, a quiet sound of acceptance. "He looks strong," she said softly. "May he be a better king than the ones we have known." Then she guided her own children closer, instructing them to bow to their new half-brother. Rhaenys obeyed, solemnly, while Aegon merely stared, too young to grasp the gravity of it. Lyanna found herself oddly moved by Elaya's composure. Some part of her respected the princess's resolve to coexist, no matter how painful it must be. Despite the joy in the Red Keep over Prince Aemon's arrival, the realm's troubles had not vanished. Reports came from the Western campaign that the blockade was tightening around Pike, but the Ironborn still raided occasionally, using hidden inlets and cunning night attacks. Euron Greyjoy's whereabouts remained uncertain, though rumor placed him near the Stepstones, plundering merchant ships from Lys and Tyrosh. A letter from Barristan Selmy described how the Ironborn spirit was fierce, but their resources were slowly being strangled by the blockade. Balon would have to surrender or face a final siege. Tywin Lannister's name appeared often in those dispatches, commanding ships with ruthless efficiency. As Lyanna recovered her strength day by day, Rhaegar presided over the realm's ongoing governance. He named new members to the small council, ensuring a balance among the great houses. Aware that many still viewed the Targaryen restoration warily, he decreed certain tax leniencies for the Riverlands and Stormlands, hoping to repair the damage wrought by recent strife. The Stormlands were now ruled by Stannis Baratheon, a grim young man who accepted the outcome of his brother's failed rebellion with stoic bitterness. He came to King's Landing only once to reaffirm his fealty, standing stiff as a statue before Rhaegar and Lyanna, his mouth set in a grim line. Some said Stannis blamed the crown for his brother's downfall, though he would never speak it openly. Nevertheless, the Stormlands had bowed, and that was enough for now. It was not until 6 weeks after the birth of Prince Aemon that word came of Balon Greyjoy's final stand. A raven from Tywin Lannister carried the news: Pike was under siege. Lannister and Tyrell forces had surrounded the fortress by sea and land. Barristan Selmy led a vanguard that managed to breach parts of the outer ramparts, though the Ironborn fought with brutal tenacity. Balon himself was said to remain holed up in the Great Keep. Casualties mounted on both sides. Tywin urged Rhaegar to dispatch additional reinforcements if he wanted the siege ended quickly. Without them, the fight might drag on for months. Lyanna stood with Rhaegar in the council chamber, the raven's message spread on the table. Outside, the day was bright, the sun gilding the rooftops of King's Landing. Inside, the mood was heavy. Rhaegar rubbed his temples, frustration etched on his features. "We can send more men, but that would leave the capital vulnerable. And I hesitate to levy another round of conscription. The realm is weary of war." Tywin's letter was explicit, only overwhelming force would bring Balon to heel promptly. Otherwise, the Ironborn might hold out behind Pike's walls, forcing a long siege that drained resources. Oberyn Martell, present at the council, gave a mirthless smile. It seems you must choose between a quick, costly victory or a slow, grinding one. Neither is pleasant. Maester Pycelle, summoning his usual obsequious tone, intoned that the realm could ill afford a protracted war, especially with winter approaching. Rhaegar fixed a hesitant glance upon Lyanna. She knew what he was silently asking: should he depart for Pike in person to rally the forces and end the siege? A king's presence on the battlefield could tip the scales, but the idea filled her with dread. She had almost lost him once against Robert Baratheon. And now there was the child to consider, a newborn who needed his father as well as his mother. She took a steadying breath. We can spare a portion of the royal guard and some crownland levies, enough to bolster Tywin and Barristan. But I don't think you should go yourself. Our son needs you here. The realm needs you here. He nodded slowly. I agree. Let Barristan carry on. I trust his honor and skill. Tywin's leadership may be cold, but it is effective. We'll reinforce them. With luck, Pike will fall before the year's end. The next days passed in a swirl of logistical preparations. Lyanna, still not fully recovered, found herself at a desk signing orders for troop movements, checking supply manifests, ensuring new soldiers were properly equipped. The city bustled with more men heading west. From her solar window, she watched them march out of the gates in columns, dust rising from their boots, banners snapping in the wind. A sense of déjà vu washed over her. Hadn't they just done this months ago, marching off to quell Robert's rebellion? Now they marched to quell Balon's defiance. How many times must the realm bleed? As the soldiers departed, a hush seemed to settle over the Red Keep. Many of the lords had gone with them, and the corridors felt emptier. In her quiet moments, Lyanna walked with baby Aemon in the castle gardens, the autumn leaves drifting around them. She would hold him close, inhaling the faint, milky scent of his skin. Sometimes Rhaegar joined them, wearing a wistful smile as he pointed out the bright red leaves of the ornamental trees to his son. The godswood, too, offered a tranquil respite, though its weirwood was small. She would kneel there, whispering a northern prayer for those fighting in the west, for the father of her child who carried so much hope on his shoulders. Ravens arrived periodically from the siege. The Ironborn were cornered, their ships either destroyed or captured. Balon was rumored to have lost 2 sons in the fighting. One letter reported that Barristan Selmy had distinguished himself in capturing a key bastion on Pike's perimeter, but had been gravely wounded while saving a young knight from a volley of crossbow bolts. Tywin Lannister demanded more rams and siege engines to batter down Pike's walls. Rhaegar dispatched them, straining the crown's coffers further. Another letter claimed that Euron Greyjoy had finally appeared, not to aid Balon, but to pillage from behind the lines, attacking an isolated Tyrell supply fleet in the night. The cunning pirate vanished again, leaving havoc in his wake. 2 moons later, near the end of autumn, the final raven arrived. Pike had fallen. Balon Greyjoy, seeing the hopelessness of his position, surrendered after Tywin's men cracked a section of the Great Keep's wall. Barristan Selmy, though wounded, was the first to accept Balon's sword. Tywin insisted on harsh terms. Balon was made to kneel publicly in the ruined courtyard of Pike, renouncing all claims of independence. Many Ironborn were executed for piracy. The Crown's forces torched several Ironborn longships as a warning. Balon was allowed to keep his title of Lord of the Iron Islands, but at a steep price, a heavy tribute to the Crown, hostages sent to King's Landing, and an oath to never again raise arms against the throne. Word spread that the Lannisters wanted Balon to yield his last surviving son as a ward to ensure compliance. When the victorious forces returned, battered but triumphant, the capital erupted in celebration. Bells rang, feasts were held, and the small folk cheered in relief that another threat to the realm was contained. Tywin Lannister arrived by ship, stepping onto the docks with the aura of a man who had shaped history once more. Barristan Selmy was born on a litter, recovering from his wounds, but hailed as a hero for his unwavering bravery. The Ironborn hostages, spare sons and nephews of Balon's household, stood chained in grim silence, forced to watch the fanfare that heralded the Crown's success. Lyanna felt a pang of sympathy for them, but also an unspoken relief that the conflict was ended. For now. In the Grand Throne Room, Rhaegar received Tywin, Barristan, and the returning knights. Lyanna stood by his side, baby Aemon in her arms so that the realm could see the living symbol of Targaryen Stark unity. The lords applauded. Euron Greyjoy was nowhere to be seen, having vanished once again, but few lamented his absence. The Iron Islands, thoroughly beaten, posed no immediate threat. As far as the realm was concerned, the Ironborn problem was solved. When the ceremony concluded, Rhaegar led Lyanna to a quieter alcove, the baby beginning to fuss. The king exhaled a long breath. "It's done. Our men fought bravely and the war is over." Lyanna adjusted Aemon in her arms, who quieted at the sound of her voice. "One war ends and the realm has peace, at least for a moment." Rhaegar reached out, gently stroking the infant's cheek. "Perhaps that moment is all we can hope for. Let the realm rest. Our child deserves to grow up without swords and flames at every turn." She nodded, gazing down at the babe. Part of her marveled that they had navigated so many perils, Robert's fury, political upheavals, the Ironborn defiance, and still stood united. A new mother, a queen who had once been a wild northern girl. A once dreamy prince turned king, forging alliances by steel and prophecy alike. Their burdens were immense, yet in that moment, as Aemon's tiny fingers wrapped around her own, it felt almost worth it. The realm entered a phase of relative calm. Rebuilding began in the Stormlands and along the western coasts ravaged by raiders. Balon Greyjoy nursed his wounded pride, bound by stringent terms that limited his fleet. The Lannisters swelled with power at court, though Rhaegar sought to balance their influence by granting offices to other houses. Dorne, though still wary, sensed an opportunity to mend old rifts. If the crown was stable, perhaps Elaya's children would not be threatened. And in King's Landing, the small folk whispered stories of the Wolf Queen who had fought in battle and now bore the king's heir. In the Red Keep's courtyard one brisk morning, Lyanna found herself watching Rhaenys and young Aegon chase each other, giggling and shrieking in the mild autumn sun. Aemon lay in a cradle nearby, dozing contentedly. Elia Martell sat on a bench not far off, occasionally calling for her children to be careful. Lyanna lingered a short distance away, arms folded, silently keeping watch. She still felt uncertain around Elia, but saw that the princess's devotion to her children was unwavering. For all the heartbreak she had endured, Elia maintained a dignity that Lyanna could only respect. Sensing a presence, Lyanna turned to see Oberyn approaching, arms clasped behind his back. He halted beside her, following her gaze toward his niece and nephew. For a time, neither spoke. Then Oberyn said quietly, "You have your child now. Rhaenys and Aegon have a half-brother. It seems the realm is content to let these lines of succession remain entangled." Lyanna kept her voice low. "They are all Rhaegar's children. The realm will not see them as equals, but perhaps we can teach them to be siblings, not rivals." Oberyn let out a soft snort. "Westeros has seldom been kind to half-siblings vying for inheritance. But perhaps you and Rhaegar will succeed where others have failed." She studied him. "Does Dorne accept the peace we've brokered? Will you stand by if a future crisis arises? Or will you always look for the Viper's revenge?" He met her gaze, a flicker of old anger there. "I do not forget, Wolf Queen, but I see that you are no monster. You've done less harm to my sister than we feared. In a better world, Elia would not be overshadowed by your crown. But we do not live in that world. Perhaps I can abide it, so long as no further insult befalls her or her children." Lyanna inclined her head. "That is all I can ask." They continued to watch Rhaenys and Aegon as the children's laughter echoed amid the Red Keep's stone walls. Behind them, the city bustled on, oblivious to the precarious balances that held the realm together. Each day, Rhaegar and Lyanna governed, issuing edicts to restore roads, feed the hungry, and quell petty feuds among lords. Winter threatened from the north, creeping closer. The realm's attention shifted to stockpiling grain and securing trade routes. Everywhere, people prayed that no new rebellion or foreign threat would shatter the fragile peace. But in the highest tower of the Red Keep, late at night, Rhaegar would sometimes speak of his dreams. He confided to Lyanna that he could not shake the sense that a greater danger loomed beyond the boundaries of petty politics. The White Walkers, the ancient darkness rumored to dwell beyond the wall, haunted the edges of old stories. Some nights he would pace, restless, muttering about portents in the flames or the alignment of stars. Lyanna would calm him, reminding him that the realm was vast and that the Night's Watch still guarded the far north. She herself had never seen a White or a Walker, only dire wolves and harsh snows. Yet the possibility weighed upon them. If the dire threat of legend ever returned, would their child, would all their children, be prepared? She thought of John Connington's letters from beyond the sea, describing rumors of a dragon queen in Essos, a princess named Daenerys, Rhaegar's own sister, exiled as an infant before the Mad King's fall. Some whispered she might have survived, that she and her brother Viserys roamed the free cities in search of allies. The mention of that lost Targaryen branch made Lyanna uneasy. Another claim to the throne, potentially if they ever returned. But Rhaegar had heard no firm news. Perhaps it was just the swirl of rumor that always clung to the Targaryen name. Still, Lyanna sensed that even in victory their rule was not unassailable. Threats could emerge from anywhere, Essos, the north, within the realm itself. Yet for the time being, the queen found a measure of contentment in her daily life. She fed her son with her own hands, ignoring the southern custom that noblewomen should not nurse. She took counsel with Rhaegar in the Solar, shaping laws aimed at ensuring the small folk recovered from the ravages of war. She insisted on accountability for corrupt officials, gaining a reputation for justice that was swift, if sometimes unsettling, to the old guard. The Wolf Queen might not have been raised in the ways of southern courtesy, but she earned respect through her directness and fairness. The realm's memory of Robert Baratheon began to fade, his thunderous laughter, his passion, and the ill-fated rebellion that ended in his death. Stannis kept Storm's End quietly, fulfilling his duties with rigid efficiency. The Lannisters rose to further prominence at court, weaving themselves into every profitable corner of governance. Dorne remained watchful, supporting Alya's children while allowing Lyanna's son to exist alongside them. The North, under Brandon Stark's stewardship, enjoyed an uneasy truce with the crown, loyal for Lyanna's sake yet ever mindful of Targaryen atrocities past. The Greyjoys, beaten into submission, held their islands in sullen silence. Seasons shifted. The final leaves fell, and winter's chill settled over the land, not yet harsh but a clear sign of what was to come. Lyanna often glanced northward, imagining how snow would already be piling high at Winterfell. She wrote letters to Ned, urging him to ensure the watch was well provisioned. The younger siblings who never existed in the scenario, Benjen, for instance, did not figure into her story, but she thought of the watch all the same, of the men in black who guarded realms of men from shadows few remembered. Rhaegar occasionally spoke of forging a grand alliance among all the lords to reinforce the wall, but the pressing realities of the day always intervened. The realm was slow to act on threats that seemed distant and half-mythical. In that manner, the first year of Prince Aemon's life passed. He grew into a curious infant, eyes a stormy mix of gray and faint violet, hair darkening but with a subtle sheen that betrayed his Targaryen heritage. He babbled and crawled across the floors of the royal chambers, delighting the servants. Sometimes, as Lyanna watched him, she would recall the intense swirl of events that had led her here, Harrenhal's tourney, the stolen moment when Rhaegar gave her winter roses, the war for the throne, Robert's downfall, and the endless swirl of alliances. She thought of how different her life might have been if she had remained a rebellious northern girl, refusing the crown. Perhaps she would have run with Robert, married him after all, lived as the Lady of Storm's End. But that path had vanished the moment she claimed her own fate. Rhaegar's eyes often shone with pride when he beheld Aemon. It softened his temper and he grew more patient in counsel, more thoughtful in his judgments. He still delved into old texts, searching for more about the prophecy, but his urgency seemed to lessen, replaced by a fatherly devotion. Alya's children, Aegon and Rhaenys, played with Aemon under the watchful eye of Septas. At times they quarreled, as all children do, but to Lyanna's relief, the older two never seemed to blame the baby for existing. If anything, Rhaenys doted on him, calling him little brother as she tried to teach him words. Elia, whenever she visited, had a distant sadness, but she no longer shunned them. Perhaps, thought Lyanna, old wounds heal with time, if not perfectly, at least enough to let life continue. Word from Essos arrived now and then, Sellsword companies stirring unrest, the free cities scheming for trade. The possible existence of Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen lingered as a rumor. Rhaegar, mindful of the family name, dispatched envoys to discreetly search for them. Nothing definitive was found. Possibly they had died or adopted false identities. Or perhaps they were biding their time. Lyanna only hoped they did not arrive with an army at the gates one day. claiming the throne as truer Targaryens than she and Rhaegar. Yet it weighed less on her mind than the daily tasks of queenship, resolving disputes, funding repairs to war-torn villages, ensuring the capital's water supply was clean. There were whispered rumors of trouble in the far north, wildlings massing beyond the wall, sightings of strange lights in the sky, but the Night's Watch remained silent on the matter, sending only routine dispatches stating that their numbers were too few but there was no immediate crisis. Still, an inkling of dread settled in Lyanna's heart whenever she thought of the vast, frozen lands beyond the wall. She had grown up with tales of the long night. She had listened to old Nan's stories of the others, of how they came in the darkness and brought cold and death. She wondered if Rhaegar's prophecy might tie to that old fear, but no one else at court seemed concerned. Most believed them to be mere legends, and so life continued in King's Landing, with feasts, courtiers, and the unending swirl of political maneuvering. On a chill morning, as the year drew to a close, Lyanna stood on a high balcony, watching the sun rise over Blackwater Bay. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the sea reflecting the colors in shimmering waves. She held Aemon against her shoulder, his small fingers clutching at her braid of dark hair. He babbled something unintelligible, but she liked to pretend he was pointing at a passing gull. Down below, the city was waking, bakery smoke curling from chimneys, wagons rattling along cobblestone streets. It was a peaceful moment. She breathed in the cold air, remembering the crisp winds of Winterfell. She felt Rhaegar's presence before he spoke. He slid an arm around her waist, smiling as he looked at Aemon. "He grows stronger each day," Lyanna nodded. "He'll be walking soon, if he keeps trying to climb out of his cradle." Rhaegar kissed the top of Aemon's head, then gazed out at the harbor. "Our realm is quiet at last. Balon Greyjoy is subdued. The Stormlands remain loyal under Stannis. The Lannisters are content with the power they've amassed, and Dorne endures as always. I wonder if we dare hope for lasting peace." Lyanna's lips curved into a faint smile. "Westeros is too vast, too fractious for lasting peace. But perhaps we've earned a reprieve. We can strengthen the realm's foundations, so if any new threat arises, we'll be ready." He looked at her with affection. "You have become a true queen, Lyanna. I remember you as the wild wolf, racing horses in the wind. I never dreamed we'd stand here, side by side." She met his eyes. "Neither did I, but we made our choices." She glanced down at Aemon, who yawned drowsily, his tiny hand curling against her. "And we have our future in our arms." In that moment, they stood together, the king and queen of the Seven Kingdoms, cradle of a new Targaryen Stark prince in their grasp, the horizon of possibilities stretching before them like the dawn. Ghosts of prophecy, the weight of alliances, and the memory of those who had fallen all pressed upon them, but there was also hope, bright and tenuous. Lyanna Stark, who had once resisted every chain placed on her, now held perhaps the greatest bond of all, the destiny of a realm she had helped to forge and the child who might someday inherit it. Far to the north, the wind keened over icy forests and frozen rivers. Far to the east, the seas churned with uncertain tidings. But here, in King's Landing, as sunlight gilded the towers of the Red Keep, Lyanna Stark allowed herself a moment of fragile peace. She cradled her son, and beside her stood Rhaegar Targaryen, united in a precarious marriage that had, against all odds, reshaped Westeros. The seasons would change, the tides of power would shift, and threats might gather again. Yet for now, the realm stood under their shared rule, with winter on the horizon and a future that glimmered like the first star at dusk, distant but full of promise.